We have a quorum.
We have a quorum?
Yes.
All right, good evening, everyone. The time is 6:03 p.m. and I'd like to call to order this East Bay Community Energy Board of Directors meeting today on Wednesday, October 19th, 2022. We're here in person at the Lake Merritt Room at Cal State East Bay Oakland Center at 1000 Broadway, Suite 109, Oakland, California. And we're also operating as a hybrid meeting under AB 361. This meeting is being conducted pursuant to provisions to the Brown Act to facilitate teleconferencing to reduce the risk of COVID-19 transition in public meetings. AB 361 suspends some Brown Act rules related to teleconferencing, but continues to require that we notice meetings in advance and allow the public to participate, which we are doing in person and online via Zoom. East Bay Community Energy has met all the applicable notice requirements. We're using the Zoom meeting platform, and the Zoom link is listed on the agenda. During the meeting, if you wish to be recognized, use the raise hand feature in the participants button on Zoom. And if you're calling through the telephone only, you can raise your hand by pressing *9, and you can unmute yourself by pressing *6. At this time, I will ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Yes, can everyone hear me? Great, thank you. Alameda County. Alameda County. Albany.
Here.
Berkeley. Berkeley. Dublin. Dublin. Fremont.
Here, Teresa Cox.
Great, thank you. Hayward.
Present.
Thank you. Livermore.
Right here.
Thank you. Newark. Newark. I can see you.
I'm here.
Oh, great, thank you. Oakland. Oakland. Piedmont. Pleasanton.
Present.
Thank you. Tracy.
Present.
Thank you. Union City.
Here.
Community Advisory Committee. Community Advisory.
Present.
Yes, thank you. San Leandro.
Present.
Emory.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you.
Berkeley's here also. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, member from Berkeley. And as some of us are here in person for the first time since 2020, and we have a flag in the room, we're going to take the opportunity to do the Pledge of Allegiance. And with will our Vice Chair please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, now it's time for public comment. This item is reserved for persons wishing to address the board on any EBCE-related matters that are not otherwise on the meeting agenda. Public comments on matters listed on the agenda will be heard at the time the matter is called. As with all public comment, members of the public who wish to address the board are customarily limited to 2 minutes per speaker and must complete an electronic speaker slip. Please note that Member Calv has joined us. And I will ask the clerk to please recognize anyone with their hands raised or anyone who's submitted a speaker card, and then go ahead and read into the record any comments that have been submitted electronically that have asked to be read into the record.
Great, thank you. Just want to recognize Member Kumagai, who is present. And we've received, you have 2 hands raised, Blair Beekman and Alan. Blair Beekman, you're recognized for 2 minutes.
Hi, Blair Beekman here. Happy October meeting to everyone. This is the big month of the IRP report. Sorry that I don't know its name to tell you the depth of my knowledge in life. But this is the month for the report, and good luck how it will be talked about tonight. It's an important item, and yeah, I don't know what to say other than just a hello to everyone, and good luck how our practices of 2023, how we can prepare for our practices of 2022, how we can get ready to be working in 2023. Thanks a lot.
Great, thank you very much. Alan, you're recognized for 2 minutes.
Hello, my name is Alan Marling. I'm a Livermore resident, and I'm in favor of nuclear energy. And this is not to say we should pursue nuclear energy exclusively, but instead as part of a green energy portfolio with wind and solar. All the reports I've seen stress the importance of source diversity, including the California's 2021 SB 100 Joint Agency Report. Unfortunately, NIMBYs against solar farms will often say that nuclear energy is better, pitting one renewable against the other. I suspect they also attend planning meetings for nuclear power plants to say solar energy is safer. The reality is we will need both. I thank you for your continued dedication toward maximizing the production of local green energy.
Thank you. I will read the next 2 comments submitted written public comment into the record. Hold on 1 second. Our first written public comment was submitted by Tom Kelly. Tom Kelly states the following. Members of the Board of Directors, I have compiled data from the 2021 power content labels that have been furnished by the California Energy Commission. I've turned the data into a chart and spreadsheet attached to indicate how EBCE's default product, Bright Choice, stacks up against the default products from other load-serving entities in Northern California. Here are some of the highlights. 1, EBCE has one of the dirtiest climate-disrupting power mixes in Northern California. Member jurisdictions whose default product is Bright Choice have seen significant increases in greenhouse gases associated with electricity since 2018 and 2019, when EBCE had a far cleaner mix. PG&E, number 2, PG&E has one of the cleanest power mixes in Northern California. Point number 3, a number of CCAs that provide cleaner electricity than EBCE do not rely on nuclear power. Point number 4, EBCE's Joint Powers Agreement states that EBCE will beat PG&E on greenhouse gases. In 2001, EBCE's Bright Choice produced nearly 6 times more greenhouse gases per megawatt hour than PG&E's default product. Point number 5, EBCE promised to exceed PG&E's renewable energy content, but failed to do so in 2021 and will likely fail again in 2022. Those who fought for years to develop an Alameda County CCA never envisioned that our CCA would actually be responsible for making climate change worse. It is time for the board to direct the staff to clean up the power supply now and fulfill the promises that were made. Tom Kelly, Berkeley. And that concludes public comment.
Thank you very much, Adrian, for reading that into the record. And I believe that the board also received that electronically as well. So I'll just confirm that. Next up, we have our consent agenda. Members, does anyone wish to pull or discuss any of the consent agenda items? Okay, seeing no hands. Mr. Clerk, is there any speaker card that has been submitted for public comment or any raised hands?
There is one raised hand for this item.
Let's go ahead and recognize the speaker for 2 minutes, please.
Blair Beekman, you're recognized for 2 minutes.
Hi, Blair Beekman here. I think item 4 or 5 talks about a continuation of the hybrid meeting process. And I just wanted to take this time to offer, the work that I do in my life mainly is around community technology accountability and open public policies for our future. And, you know, that's very much related to this hybrid work, that the concepts of making the hybrid process open and accessible to the public, that's an interesting concept that we can broaden our reach of how we talk to ourselves as a community, which is interesting. And it's from that if we have open, accessible technology practices, say with the Zoom meeting process and the new cameras that are being installed within city public meetings, to make that open and accessible to the public, that makes them more trusting of the process. And if they can be allowed to ask questions and those questions can be answered simply and easily and openly, that develops our better sustainable practices for our future. And that's positivity. That's ending this crazy era we're in of really serious, I don't know what else to call it, but state-sponsored violence and extremism, basically. We're trying to address the era of 9/11. We're trying to address the era of COVID with, you know, down-to-earth practices of person-to-person contact and human relations at the local community level really can offer a lot. So it's important we work on good accessibility ideas that openness and accountability with tech can offer. Good luck how we do that and in the hybrid meeting process. And thanks overall.
Thank you. That concludes public comment.
Can you make the speaker, please? Thank you, Speaker, for bringing that up. I should mention, if folks haven't heard, that the governor's state of emergency is going to be lifted on February 28, 2023. So we're able to use the hybrid meeting structure under AB 361 until then. So, you know, if folks need to take advantage of that until that time. And then also we have a legislative update later in our meeting tonight. So if we want to support anything for next legislative session, I think that might be a good time to bring that up. But we didn't have any questions or anything to pull from the consent calendar. Is there any discussion, or I'd be happy to entertain a motion on the consent agenda? We have a motion in the room from Vice Chair Lopez. And a second in the room from Member Monroe.
I mean, you know, we could make it, you know, like wind room and hybrid. So I don't know. I mean, whatever. I'm happy to be the second.
All right, we have a motion from Vice Chair and a second from Member Monroe. Member Hannon, did you have a question, or were you getting in line to make a motion? All right.
Great.
Very good. So I'll have the clerk please call the roll.
Thank you. Alameda County. Albany.
Yes.
Berkeley.
Yes.
Evelyn.
Yes.
Fremont.
Yes.
Hayward.
Yes.
Livermore.
Yes.
Newark.
Aye.
Thank you. Oakland.
Aye.
Thank you. Piedmont.
Aye.
Pleasanton.
Aye.
Gracie. Gracie. Thank you. Union City.
Aye.
And Leandro.
Aye.
Thank you. And Emeryville.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Next up is our CEO report. I'll turn it over to staff to present.
Hey. So we did have an executive committee meeting, and it was held on Friday, September 30th. Presentation was on the Healthy Community Partnership, which we're going to be presenting actually as part of the CEO report here. And then we can give an update on net energy meter policy. There was also an update on the integrated resource plan that is going to be brought forward today as an action item. Our next executive committee meeting is scheduled for October 28th at noon. On the new staff front, we have quite a few new people who have joined since our last meeting. So quick in running through them, we have Stephanie LaShawn, who's our compliance management analyst. Teresa McDermott with our head of brand. We have Helen Mejia with our building electrification program analyst, Anish Patel, our director of infrastructure delivery, Michael Quiroz, our regulatory analyst, Nils Zeller, director of clean energy structure finance. So join me in welcoming a lot of people, and hopefully we'll have a whole other group of folks that we introduce in our next meeting. We'll keep the process going. Okay. So Healthy Communities Partnership. So this is some work that I've been doing since our meeting in July. At our July meeting, there was direction given from the board to keep kind of the overall structure of the then proposed grant to Children's Hospital Oakland, and to rethink it and think about how to put more details around what the program could look like, and put more details around the tie-in to building electrification, and which is obviously core to our business. And so with that direction, staff has gone back and put some more thought and presented largely this structure, this sort of initial sort of proposal or sort of concept at our executive committee. There was some feedback provided at the executive committee meeting. And so we incorporated that feedback as well. So, as a starting point, one of the comments that was made at our executive committee meeting was the recognition that there have been quite a few studies looking at the detrimental effects of combusting natural gas in households. Recognize that. I think one of the missing pieces, though, is really studying the beneficial effects of electrification. So we know how bad combustion of natural gas is, and we think, well, if we take the natural gas out, you build clean heat pumps or induction, that should improve the situation. But how well does it improve it? And I think significantly also is, what are the health impacts of that, right? If somebody has asthma in a household, how much are things likely to improve? Is that person's situation going to improve by deploying electrification? That's important as we think about wanting to scale up building electrification. Being able to tie the electrification to specific health outcomes allows for different sources of funding, potentially much larger sources of funding, to go into and to pair with the funding that we have. Because you might say, hey, this is actually a very effective intervention. So a longer term, deeper partnership between county public health departments and CCAs may be merited because we know electrification, they know public health, we work together. This is something you want to do across tens of thousands of households. I think it's worth noting that when we were going back, I was going back and reviewing our local development business plan. And in our local development plan, it is very explicit that deploying home electrification to improve indoor air quality and health is an explicit goal of our program. So when we approved the local development business plan, there was a very clear sense that one of the reasons we're doing building electrification is to actually improve health outcomes. So I think that's useful. One of the other sort of things that we sort of learned from from a previous program, last year, maybe started 2 years ago, right as the public safety power shutoffs, after the first round and the second round of public safety power shutoffs, we launched a program to deploy home batteries in households where we were seeking, in households where there may be a durable medical device like oxygen concentrator or a ventilator, something where, hey, if the power goes out, somebody's life could be in danger. And initially we thought, let's partner with public health. Let's partner with Alameda County Public Health Department or Children's Hospital Oakland to help us find those people, because we don't know, who we know medical baseline customers, but there's a huge different set of reasons. You could have a mechanical bed, which, okay, if the power goes out, that's not necessarily life-threatening. Obviously, it can be, but there's a large range of reasons why somebody is on medical baseline. So, and we don't have the ability to parse and prioritize. So one of our findings, though, was these public health providers simply don't have the resources to partner with us. They're already stretched to 110, 120, 150%. They simply are like, we can't help you. You know, we like this idea we think this will help our patients, but we just don't have the resources to partner with you and provide those wraparound services. So it's one of our findings is if you want to go and acquire customers for electrification from specific populations that have medical conditions, and to do so, you do have to partner with public health providers, and they need incremental resources beyond what they have to be able to participate. And I mentioned that mostly because there was a comment at the executive committee meeting. Why don't we just go out there and go to Children's Hospital or Kaiser or Alameda Health System and just have them tell us who has asthma? And our findings it's just not that simple. So that's a bit of some background. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, I think we first wanted to start by sort of trying to articulate some goals. What could if we wanted to pursue a program looking at the nexus of electrification and public health, what could a program look like? So I think this is based on some feedback also at the executive committee. Is one, let's think big. Let's not think 50 households. Can we do 1,000 households? Can we do building electrification retrofits in 1,000 households? And that could be taking out gas stoves and putting in induction. That could be heat pumps, but at least one meaningful electrification measure in 1,000 households where one or more resident suffers from asthma. And then really emphasize further targeting low income and disadvantaged communities. And further to the degree possible, also focusing on multifamily. To do this, we need to establish partnerships. Again, the question becomes, how do we reach these populations? It's not our business. We might know who our care customers are, but even then, in a lot of the programs we do rely on community-based organizations and local government, our local government partners to reach our low-income care customer populations when we're doing things like the AMP program. So it's well established that having community-based, local, sort of specialized partners to reach these customers is necessary. Pair the home electrification program with the necessary research to demonstrate that there's value in scaling up home electrification as a way to improve indoor air quality. So let's ensure that if indeed there is research that demonstrates this link and understands, hey, for every induction cooktop you install, there's this improvement. Well, we're not aware of it, but we're certainly open to that information being shared with us. And if it doesn't exist, we think that there's value in making that part of this initiative so that we can go from 1,000 households to 50,000 households across the service territories that we operate, because we've demonstrated that our electrification actually has these other co-benefits. And then it gets down to sort of the scalability. We really want to think about designing a program that has scalability at this intersectionality of electrification and public health. The next slide, please. Now, that all said, I think one of the comments we've persistently received from the board and from the community is public health is not our area of expertise. We're an energy agency. And so how do we reflect that expertise? And that's really sort of the priority. Like, it makes sense for us to spend our money on electrification and energy efficiency and not necessarily spend our money on things that are not directly related to that. And I think, I've reflected on that quite a bit. And I think as a starting point, I think it probably does make a lot of sense as we're thinking about this program to say our funds, whatever that dollar amount may be, let's really say our funds are there to pay for the electrification, whether that's paying for the induction cooktop, the cost of that retrofit, the cost of the installation, the cost of all the work and just all the even some of the acquisition of those customers. But really, let's do the thing that we do, which is electrification. But then let's take time, let's invest our human capital to build the partnerships and build relationships with the right institutions who can fund some of the health side of things, the wraparound services, and deliver and also sort of do that outreach and engagement. And so, take our funds. Our funds are for the electrification. We recognize to make this program successful, there's going to need to be another tranche of funds to support the public health side. And that's what we need to go do. We need to go and find the right partner or partners who have those resources or can go and get those resources. And I think we are aware that US EPA, the US Health and Human Services Agency, as two specific examples, have grant programs that could explicitly fund the public health side of this. So those would be, if you have the right partner or partners, we could go after some of those grants together. The state of California, we're aware, I think it's Air Resources Board has funded a somewhat similar program at a smaller scale in Contra Costa County for the Contra Costa Public Health Department. So there are some buckets of funds that could be really well suited to pair with our electrification dollars, bring those together and bring sort of a transformational program together. And so that's, I think, one of the things we wanted to start as. I think at this point, narrowing our investment dollars to electrification probably makes a lot of sense. And if we're finding that doesn't work, well, then we can come back and share like, hey, we've tried this and this isn't working, we should do something. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, I think we're still kind of thinking about a 4-step potential program. And so this is the overview. There's 4 elements. One is the research program. So the research is really trying to understand before and after, and what are the what happens to indoor air quality before and after an electrification retrofit, and then what happens to public health before and after an electrification retrofit. I'm wrong. There we go. So that's the research. We do think that as we think about scaling, that you do need to sort of, as part of this, you do need to study how these things actually change, affect health to be able to justify going from 100, 1,000 to a much bigger number. So we think that makes sense. As part of that, you do need to monitor the air quality. So how does it change when you go put a heat pump in a cooktop? How does that change? What was it before? What is it after? And you want to have some persistence. You need to do the retrofit itself, and that's sort of what we've really said makes a ton of sense for us to focus our dollars on. Is, hey, we want to pay for the boots on the ground, going into the home, doing the work, and then there's the need to provide those wraparound services. So that if you're going to go and acquire those customers, you need to have the right partner who treats those folks and bring them into the program, help recruit them in to the program, and make sure that those institutions have the resources to be able to be a good partner. So those are the 4 general elements. This is obviously, we think, subject to a lot of feedback and change as we start to engage with the potential partners. Next slide, please. So as we think about the indicative participants and roles, we have a public health partner that would very likely kind of be the lead in the research side of this, or very involved in the research project, very involved in the air quality monitoring project, and then very involved in the acquisition, sort of the wraparound service element. East Bay, we are the lead funder, and we're the lead on the electrification. This is our, again, getting back to what we do, electrification. We fund this, we're the lead here. You could have an entity like the Building Decarbonization Coalition, which is really the nation's leading electrification think tank, serving as a program manager, because they're looking at a lot of these kinds of programs across the country. So having them kind of think about helping us pick and bring the right partners to the table across the board. You need a program delivery partner. We have right now we're working with a company, Revalue.io, as an example. It's an Oakland-based company. They're doing the electrification retrofits for block power. Well, that's the kind of company we would want to work with if we're going to go into households and do electrification. Again, you'd want to have an entity that can do the monitoring itself. That could be Revalue, it could be somebody else. They're actually putting the monitors in and logging the data. I think we need to pair with our electrification funds, grant grants and philanthropy. You know, that could be the US EPA, it could be HSS, it could be the Air Resources Board, it could be the Air District. We have had some good conversations with Stop Waste, it could be some Stop Waste funds, but it also could be the Kaiser Foundation. Because the Kaiser Foundation might say, you know, we're really interested in this. If you're willing to pay for the electrification, we'll pay for the public health. This is really exciting. So that is kind of indicative. And then finally, a finance partner. I think we look at the finance partner as, if we were to bring, you know, some millions of dollars for electrification, well, could we have a financial institution that could allow for further leverage? You know, could be a local bank that says, hey, we'll do low interest loans. You know, EBC brings the first $10,000 and we'll do a low interest loan for the other 10,000. So if someone can do a $20,000 retrofit instead of only doing $10,000. So that's, you know, again, pretty indicative, subject to change as we sort of flesh out these details. Next slide, please. Yeah, so you know, in terms of where we are and where we're going, and we presented this at the ExecCom, presenting this here today. You know, we think there's still, you know, a fair amount of discussion we need to have with, you know, a handful of prospective partners to put more detail around it. We're, as I said, we met with Stop Waste today and looking at how we can work with them more closely. And so, you know, I think in the December, January timeframe, but potentially sooner, we could come with when I say detailed proposal, it would be, okay, we think these are more clear to here are 2 or 3 of the prospective partners. This is the level of funding we think it could make sense for us to bring for electrification. You know, it's a not to exceed dollar amount for specific kinds of electrification, targeting specific populations. So it could be X million dollars for the next 3 years to fund electrification, predominantly targeting households where there, you know, 1 or more resident has asthma, and, you know, a particular emphasis on low-income Spanish communities. And you can say, all right, that's our framework. If the board is comfortable with that general framework, you'd say, good, we like that framework. Now go out and acquire the partners and have more detailed, you know, start thinking about going after grants that the EPA or the Health and Human Services Agency may have. And then at some point in the spring, come back with, okay, we're going after these 2 grants. We've secured these other 2 grants. We have this finance partner. We have these 3 implementation partners. Here's a package. Board, approve this package to move forward to start implementation. Okay, that's sort of where we are.
Great, thank you, Nick. Colleagues, I'd like to go to public comment first with your indulgence, because this has been a topic that we've garnered a lot of interest from the public, and we're still receiving public comment on a past iteration of this proposal. So I'll ask the clerk if any speaker cards have been submitted, and to take care of those people first, and then we will go ahead and address the people whose hands are raised. Everyone will have 2 minutes.
Great, thank you. There are 2 hands raised. Jessica Tovar, recognized for 2 minutes.
Jessica Tovar, East Bay Clean Power Alliance. Kind of want to reiterate what I reiterated to the Community Advisory Committee, is that I do appreciate that EBCE has come back with a proposal, you know, a different proposal at the request of, you know, the input from the public as well as the board. And so I do see this as moving in the right direction and addressing energy needs of the community. I still have concerns though about air sampling specifically, and the reason why is because there's been a lot of air sampling studies, and I do think that we're at a point where we really need to take action in actually doing the fuel switch, and just noting that it isn't just stoves, it's heating of homes. I heard a couple of board members talk about, you know, poor families actually heating their homes with gas stoves. That is a real problem. And fires starting from, you know, unconventional methods of heating the home, as well as deaths from carbon monoxide poisoning. So also addressing heating, water heating as well. And one of the things that needs to be also emphasized is the energy efficiency. Like, we shouldn't be doing a piecemealed fuel switch. We should be helping people to do a complete fuel switch. And there's several agencies in the East Bay area that are already doing that. And how do we synthesize all those different available assistance programs, you know, whatever discounts and, you know, whatever ways we can make it accessible. And I do think that there is a need to do this for the lowest income renters, and we should be actually researching how do we prevent displacement in the East Bay, considering that we are experiencing still hypergentrification. Thank you.
Thank you. Blair Beekman, you're recognized for 2 minutes.
Hi, thank you. Thanks a lot for offering public comment on this item tonight. Thanks a lot for the words of Jessica Tovar. She always has something interesting to say and has made it a point the past few months now that she's concerned about the piecemeal approach that this extra study session will be needing, and that she seems to feel that we have a fairly significant amount of studying done already. So we should be able to start to really move into projects and practices that I think we've been pretty sure about for ourselves already. With that said, thank you. That I think the option was offered, something how to for UCSF to possibly pay for more of the study process. That to me sounds really interesting. And for both this project and the hospital project, that really seems the better direction. Whereas the EBCE can simply more lend their name and lend their advice and expertise, as opposed to putting money in. I don't know if that's a bit simplistic, but it seems the obvious way to talk about the subject that I didn't know how to talk about before, and now I do. So thank you for that, and good luck in further development of this issue. I can understand your point of view, but from where Jessica Tabar is coming from, I think we already have pretty good understandings within the East Bay of how things work, and for her to ask to focus more on a bit more displacement issues themselves could be an interesting addition to what you're talking about now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Inside the room, we have Vice Chair Lopez.
Well, thank you very much, Nick, for your presentation, for your CEO's report. I'm very excited for the prospects and the opportunities and the benefits that we are embarking on in this discussion. And I look forward to continuing on with what we see here, and great the ability to be responsive and collaborate in the executive recently as well. One of the things that before I'm getting a little bit too much into the weeds, and some ideas some members of the public have come to me with that I'd like to share. It's also that we have been focused on homes and potentially those households that may not be able to afford to do this on their own. But there may be an opportunity also to do some mom and pop restaurants. A lot of mom and pop restaurants that are owned by recent immigrant families and so forth and so on, where there's a lot of and even for mid-sized restaurants that are locally owned, where the employees themselves may have a disproportionate impact by being subjected to natural gas throughout their day, and there might be an opportunity there to support their ranges and so forth. It's about $150,000 to get a range in, and so it would be really unduly burdensome to remove that. So perhaps we can also facilitate some sort of pilot in that area and the monitoring that goes with it. I am fully supportive of the monitoring that helps to build accountability and see how is this, we can share that data. And that can be, something that can be used nationwide, so we would really be blazing a trail there. I think we need to have those partners. It also is, we're able to come back, longitudinal study perhaps in 10 to 20 years and see how this investment impacted human life. And these are the outcomes. And that's really, I think, what is very important in government, that kind of accountability and transparency, and saying, we made this investment, this is how it translated to a community benefit that is tangible in the sense that people are healthier. And then we know that that is something that can potentially be replicated throughout the state and the country. Thank you very much for your leadership again, and for all the people and staff that worked on this. I look forward to continuing on with the conversation. Thank you.
All right, was there anyone else in the room? Member Monroe?
So I just thought this was really just very interesting to read. I wanted to back up for a second, just to sort of think about the process for how it got here. So I think that's important, and it speaks to the nature of this agency. So we started with having extra money, which was a nice thing, good thing. And we wanted to use it in a way that met our mission. And so a way was proposed to do that, goal was to reduce asthma in communities which where that is most problematic. That received, that didn't go well. But so one of the things I wanted to note is that the goal remained the same. EBCE staff took that into account and moved forward with keeping that goal in mind, rethinking what our strengths are and proposing this. And I just think that whole, I'm restating a little bit of what you did, but I think that whole sense of staying on the goal, understanding, listening, and then moving to something that is within the framework of this organization is important to keep in mind. I think that speaks to who we are as an organization. In terms of the program itself, the proposed program, this strikes me as very much being something I can support. One of the, speaking to the monitoring, are you aware that the Air Quality Board, I may have said this and I may have missed it, is going by, has small grants for local monitoring? Yeah.
So just as a comment, the Building Decarb Coalition has a grant from the Air District to do that, so they would be a potential partner to bring it.
Yeah, this is a slightly different one, but it's the same idea. It's just money's probably from the same source. So it just suggests it has a place to get partners. What it doesn't do is the indoor monitoring. And I think that of the program I'm talking about does not do the indoor monitoring, and that does strike me as being key. And then just the timetable strikes me as being realistic, going from fairly general to fairly specific as you do. Very much in support of this. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We will, Member Kavanaugh.
I can wait if you want to go to.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I also wanted to acknowledge the pivot. I appreciate that this really, I think, hones in on what was described, which is EBCE doing what we do well and kind of staying in our lane. So I appreciate that. Without going into the details, I am interested if we end up going down this path to understand a little bit better what the research side looks like. That doesn't seem like that's our strong suit. So really understanding from a partner's perspective, what the timetable is in terms of how do we actually get meaningful results? And if we're going after folks who already have asthma, whether making this kind of a change actually can affect that health outcome and whether we can measure that and what the time frame is. So I'm interested to understand how do we really research this appropriately? So I appreciate that that's not our skill set, but would love to hear from folks for whom that is. How do we structure the research so that we can actually get measurable results, and that this might be one of many studies that are happening perhaps around the country to provide insight here. So I'm supportive of the general idea, but don't have obviously any expertise in thinking about how do we structure the research so that we can get the results back, and what is that timetable to understand if we wanted to make this bigger, when would that happen? Is that 3 years? Is that 10 years? Like, what does that look like? So we'd love more information from the folks for whom that is their expertise. Thank you.
Thank you. Anna Olivia Eldred.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to share the feedback from the CAC discussion and make a little comment based on public comment. I'm actually embarrassed that I regularly heat my house with my gas oven because I can justify it by baking something, and it really does make where I work warmer. And that's a very real issue for a whole bunch of people. And that was just kind of crazy to listen to. So the CAC would first like to recognize and commend the direction the proposal is heading. Staff heard direction from the public, the board, and the CAC, and came back with a different proposal that incorporates much of that feedback. This proposal, where EBCE money is spent in areas of our core competency, including fuel switching, was received well. I'm particularly happy to hear tonight the acknowledgement of residential electrification to improve indoor air quality as a specific goal of the local development business plan. There is great guidance in there and in the discussion that surrounded the development of this particular goal. For anyone who's new, it was really robust and good and should be reviewed. Feedback areas included that of public process regarding selection of program partners, technical assistance, equity, target populations, and existing research, along with some concerns regarding the unknown parameters outlined in this program, but we do recognize it is a sketch. I'm going to cover briefly some of those recommendations right now for consideration of the board. The first one is that there should be a process. It should be clear and follow similar guidelines as other proposals that happen within the county and each of our member cities. RFPs should be put out and responses should have a proper review process that includes at least one representative from the board and the CAC to determine who our partners are. We should also draw on internal resources to inform this process and establish program parameters. Stop Waste and Bayren should be, our natural partners, but there should be a process to determine and select other partnerships. Technical assistance has been offered in a number of relevant areas, including in-home audits, building electrification, efficiency standards, and connections with public health agencies. The level of experience and expertise on the CAC alone highlights the need for a clear and inclusive process, and very big props to staff for getting such a technically advanced CAC put together. We would like to commend the new timeline because we feel that it does allow for this input and this robust public process. The board should instruct staff to include in the equity measures that they are doing specific things, specifically anti-displacement measures and renter protections as a result of building improvements, as well as seeking a multitude of collaboration partners where incentives are stacked. And we may be able to coordinate on identifying households that will benefit from these projects. I was thrilled to hear about the Revalue IO partnership. Additionally, Alameda County is launching a program measuring lead in children's blood and doing lead remediation that may be a good fit. And there's a bunch of other programs already going to the same target households where we might be able to partner. We do want to focus on disadvantaged communities and environmental justice priority areas when identifying participating households, and really acknowledging that in some of our cities, including some of our new cities, that there will be several communities that might not fall within the DAC definition, but are low income and are in pollution corridors and really suffering from air quality as a whole. And really looking at existing research, taking advantage of existing studies that look at indoor air quality and build on any identified gaps. Several existing studies were offered and are being submitted to staff, the CAC, and the board. And lastly, the study parameters. There doesn't appear to be a budget, a control group, or several other components that are essential to valid research studies. We'd want to see these details before approving or moving too far forward, but recognize that this is a sketch and applaud the direction it is going.
Thank you, Chair Eldred. Next up is Member Hannon.
Thank you. Is my volume okay?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I'll be honest with you. I was excited about the investment in Oakland Children's Hospital for the reasons that were articulated when this proposal was first brought to us. Nick, refresh my memory. Did this board actually take a vote on that proposal, or was it simply set aside because of the hue and cry that we received from the community?
Set aside.
See, that's where my concern is. Staff brought together a proposal that was innovated, that was going to affect and improve those most vulnerable in our community, those that are our children, those that suffer from asthma as a result of the emissions that are in the air that they have to breathe every day. I'm going to certainly support the proposal that is before us, though I will say quite honestly, what I just heard from the CAC, with all the input that they've provided, this thing, if all that issue is taken into consideration, this thing will never get kicked off the ground. But I want to make a suggestion, Nick and Madam Chair, that if a proposal comes to this board in the future, please allow the board to weigh in and take a formal vote whether we support or do not support a proposal that's brought forward by the executive director. Again, I'm extremely disappointed that we're not investing the money where it's most helpful in our community, helping our children. I'll support the proposal that's been mentioned, but in the future, let's make sure we take formal votes so this board does what it's empowered to do, represent our entire communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Hammond. Member Patino.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I just had a question, Nick. Are we going to, as a FQHC board member, are we going to leverage the FQHCs in getting out to possibly recruit some of these people that have asthma and these other ailments? Why reinvent the wheel when we have social workers that help people right directly in the community sign up for Medi-Cal and these other programs? If they only knew about what we're trying to launch, they could also give the information to the people that would most benefit from it. And I don't think it'd be a heavy task. They know who the people in need are, and they come in contact with them every day in order to get them the benefits they need, so they can take care of their asthma and other ailments. So I think that's a good resource. It's something we wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel, and it's right there in all of our communities. We have FQHCs all across our county. So I think that's something we should look into.
Absolutely, that makes a tremendous amount of sense. I think the major sort of issue that we would foresee is those entities would need incremental funding to be able to do it, right? We can't go to these frontline public health organizations and expect them to have the resources to take on new work, learn, the same way public health is not our expertise, energy is not their expertise, right? And so the amount of training and really just time and effort that it would take, that's not free. And so I think that's where, to implement a program like this, we would need to secure funding for those folks to be able to effectively partner with us to do this.
Okay, well, yeah, I think we really should look into it, because we also, the workers, I'll also help them get, when they're food insecure, get them resources for that too. So being able to live in a healthy home when you have asthma or other pulmonary ailments, I think is right up there with making sure that they're not food insecure.
Thank you, Member Patino. Member Harrison.
Yes, I wanted to thank, sorry, my audio just went out. I want to thank Nick and the executive committee for all of their work on this. And I do want to just differ a little bit from Director Hannon. There was a lot of discussion at the board. I think we didn't take a vote because there was so much discussion. It wasn't just external pressure. I had serious concerns, both financially and legally. And I think this is moving us in a really, really good direction. I really appreciate this. I think we may end up with the same partners that we started thinking about, but we put it in a framework where we understand what their role will be, what our role will be, how the connections will be made. And I really appreciate that. I think it's been just an excellent evolution. And I want to second the comments from the member from Livermore. I did have a couple of questions, Nick, if you don't mind. One is, we've already focused a lot of energy, I think, through Block Power on owners of single family homes, et cetera, and condos. Is there a way to make this more renter specific? And how do we deal with not avoiding displacement when we put more expensive devices in people's homes? Have we given that much thought yet?
I would be fairly hesitant to start to tie the design of this program to anti-displacement. One, certainly not an area of expertise. I don't have a lot of commentary there, but I think we really want to focus on getting these measures installed in households and prioritizing low-income households. Certainly, I think the idea of focusing on, there was a comment made at the executive committee to focus on multifamily.
Right.
Oftentimes, and particularly income qualified multifamily. So that gets to sort of your renter question. I think so these become more of the specific details when we think about designing the program. You likely have to have a slightly different approach when you're dealing with renters who might not own. So a water heater might be more challenging, but a renter may be less of a lift to be able to take out a stove. Whereas for that is something that presumably if they own it, they can leave. Like I'm gonna take my cooktop with me when I go if I move. But I think those are details, but I think that those are some of those are embedded in the priorities, but I think we can come back and further reflect some of those priorities as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. And I think anything you can do to focus on multifamily would be great. I know it's a tough road. And then I wanted to ask just about the disadvantaged communities aspect. Are you looking at this as, and you may not know yet because we're just at the beginning, you look at this individual households that have been identified or census tracts or DACs that have been identified as having more households and then identifying households within those, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think if we want to focus, there's the public health element. We say we really want to focus on, say, you partner with your Alameda Health System, your Kaiser, and your Oakland Children's. There's sort of 3 health systems. They operate across the county, and in Kaiser and Oakland Children's, they operate in San Joaquin County as well. So, okay, they get you good coverage, and then you're focusing on them recruiting patients that have asthma into your program. I think you could have a further screen around income or, where they live, right? And I think that those are sort of the kinds of questions we want to sort of ask when we think about how many parameters do you want to put around recruitment? Because if you have too many parameters, it can be hard to recruit people into your program.
Right.
Certainly you want to prioritize your resources to those most in need. And so I think that those are I think stating those as priorities is really important so that we can then have the dialogue around how do we actually effectuate a program design that has those priorities embedded.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll just put in my pitch for looking at DACs, particularly those near freeways, because in addition to the indoor air quality issues or the exterior issues that affect whole neighborhoods. So thank you very much again for your work. I really appreciate this evolution. I think this is a great place that we've ended up, and I'm really excited to be partnering with you on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Marquez.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I want to thank staff for all of their work on this, my board colleagues, as well as the community. I have a lot of mixed feelings around this. If memory serves me correct, I believe on the Finance and Procurement Committee, we did hear this item. It wasn't a vote. It was just more of an informational item. So there was a committee that got an early look at this. But I will be honest, at the time, very similar to our chair on that committee, Mr. Hannon, I was just very excited about the opportunity to help individuals that are struggling with asthma. So it sounded very exciting. We do have this additional money, but then, after sitting with it for a while, for me, process is very important. So I really appreciate the fact that staff is now looking at specific program criteria. It's going to be key that we go out for an RFP, that we just don't, base funding towards relationship we may have with a specific entity, whether it's a good serving entity or not. I think, these are public dollars. We need to be a little bit more responsible and have a process in place. So I'm really comfortable with the direction we're going. In terms of the programming, the first three ones are the most appealing to me. The fourth program, my concern with that, I know it's early on and that's the later phase, but for me right now, I'm just struggling with our content level, with Bright Choice. I feel we need to be focusing more energy on that and making it cleaner. So I think when we have these discussions, it would be helpful just to kind of get feedback from the board members in terms of what are our priorities, where do we want to direct staff to spend time and energy. So to me right now, I feel like that is the most pressing issue. I know that's going to come up later on the agenda as well, but I really appreciate everyone's input, and I'm optimistic that we will land where we need to with making sure that we are addressing equity issues, striking a balance between home ownership and rentals, but really trying to improve health outcomes for individuals. I'm definitely in support of that. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Member Martinez. Member Cpuc. You know what? You've got, Adrian, do you see how that, I see you're shaking your head, but do you see how there's a hand raised on our in-room Zoom, but it's not in the meeting?
I don't have my hand raised, but hello, everyone. Good to see you.
I just wanted to make sure that was really you.
Right.
Prop. So I'm going to assume that Member Narum and Doug Allen, you do not have your hands raised either. Okay, great. Just let us know. Just pipe in if you'd like to speak. But it sounds like everyone who had a question or a comment has already gone through. I'll give my comments as well. I'd like to thank staff for making this pivot. I think we're moving in a really good direction. I just want to highlight something that a public commenter said, that there is a need to take action. We've been working on this for a good 5 months now. I think it started out as a good idea. Now it's an even better idea. But I would like to help move things along. Nick, you talked about possibly coming back to the board with a framework that we could approve and help you get moving in a direction. And I think that if we brought this item back in November, I think it would add transparency by adding another public meeting, but not add time to the process in the end. We would get to our goal sooner and start helping people. And I just wanted to add that when we originally started talking about this, but in its other iteration, the folks that we were talking about helping were frequent flyers to emergency rooms. And I don't want to forget, as we're adding on layers and layers of, what we're looking for and which households we're trying to help. I do agree that we should be looking at low-income households. I do agree that we should be looking at frontline communities, but let's not forget that there's a specific health outcome that has happened for these people who live on the front lines. And we first were talking about children, but it might be adults as well, but people who are frequent flyers with asthma as a result of indoor and outdoor pollution, frankly, and the fossil fuel industry and the problems associated with fossil fuels. So I just wanted to put that in, and I wanted to check in with Nick to see if that's possible to bring this back in November, just not for a detailed presentation, but just so. And I also just want to keep in mind that a lot of our longstanding members may or may not be here come December. So, I myself would love a chance to weigh in one last time with a thumbs up or a thumbs down on the direction that we're taking. So can we do that in November and talk about a framework and possibly an amount that we would be spending specifically on electrification?
Yeah, I think, given the feedback that I've gotten, I have a framework around here's the populations that we want to prioritize. I think that's been articulated fairly consistently, that we want to focus on, our residents with asthma, and particularly folks that are frequent flyers, so particularly acute asthma. We want to focus on investing electrification into households to help improve indoor air quality and ameliorate their health. We like the idea of supporting kind of a demonstration and potentially finding partners to invest in the necessary research to demonstrate to take this beyond anecdote, to actually demonstrate that yes, electrifying a household where somebody has asthma is going to improve their health, such that, you know, this allows for scalability. It can be a program that can be demonstrable, you know, in our communities beyond this or everywhere else. Emphasis on our low income communities and frontline communities, certainly not a limiting factor. So I think that's a framework, right? And there's sort of a recognition that, you know, we need a certain kinds of partners. I don't think we need to actually say who they are. I think we want to go through a process to assess who the right partners are. So I think that framework with a dollar amount where we say, okay, we want, you know, initially it was $15 million total. We might say $10 million for the electrification. And we do it over the course of 3 to 5 years. So we want to say 10 million, that could be a number. We say $10 million for electrification measures over the next 3 to 5 years in households that have these specific characteristics. We're going to go look and try to bring a program back in the next 6 to 9 months that has those characteristics. That would be the kind of thing I think we would bring. And it wouldn't be that much different than what we have here. I think that the dollar amount is a dollar amount that we talked about in the context of our budget, as we have the money in our budget to afford a kind of an investment, and we have a framework outlined. So you pair those two together, and then we would have, you know, sort of direction for the next 6 months to go and try to bring a full package for the board to vote on in 6 months or whatever time frame.
Great. So let's have an item next month so we can help you move it along, and you know you're going in the direction that this composition of the board has set up, because there are going to be a lot of new members, and it will be, you know, like I said, we've been on this for 5 months, and new members will be fresh at it. So thank you, everybody, for sitting through this item. Next up, we've got staff report. Item number 11. This is the update on EBCE's state and legislative process, and I'll turn it over to staff.
Community Advisory Committee.
Oh, I'm sorry. Anna Olivia, are you there?
Yep.
Sorry about that. I was not going through the agenda properly. Go ahead, please.
That's just fine. This is actually pretty brief. There are really just 2 items. One is that staff is coming back. There's been a lot of requests from the public and members around being curious about the number of jobs that EBCE has created, and just really wanted to throw a shout out to staff member Alex and say thank you. We are expecting that around the end of the week, and just really want to thank him for his incredible cooperation and work on that. And then wanted to give a heads up to this body that the issue of an in-house call center is becoming a heated issue again. And so some folks may remember that from when we started. There's a lot of discussion happening about this, both in our body, but also in some groups that represent large numbers of our very organized constituents. Some specific interest from the labor community, and the response from staff was reiterating the reasons that the board of directors approved the temporary use of an external call service. SMUD is unionized, they provide excellent service, all of those things. But there was a very clear statement made and a timeline provided on bringing that call center in-house. And I just wanted to raise that this was an issue that was becoming heated in the community again. And so we do look forward to hearing an update on a timeline, especially to that timeline that was laid out to the board. And that is all.
Great, thank you. Now are there any questions for Anne Olivia? Okay, seeing none. Oh, did you have one?
Yeah.
Okay, go
When
ahead.
you
Vice Chair.
say heated, are you saying by the members that are represent labor within the advisory committee, or are you saying people are giving comment to you, doing public comment to you on that? And then also, that's a question and a comment, as I recall, as part of it was facilities. And I think if I recall correctly, and I could be wrong because a lot's happened since then, that once we have a facility and perhaps bring some of it, I don't know whether we would do contractual or not, but remind me that maybe some of the people that we contract with, that there's an opportunity to see at our new facility, but there's still that.
Yeah, so there was in our contract this month, there was sort of we contemplated the possibility of having space in our office for their call center representatives to spend time. I think one of the caveats we stated was as long as SMUD call center operators continue to work from home, it would be challenging for us from a labor, because we don't negotiate the labor agreement between SMUD operators and SMUD. If their labor agreement calls for their operators to work from home, I don't know that we're in a position where we can say, no, well, you have to come to East Bay Community Energy and work in our offices, whereas like your primary labor agreement allows you to work remotely. So there's some tension there. What we have done is there's a current open process. They're looking to hire some new CSRs, SMUD, and so we've had a very explicit sort of process to open that recruiting to residents of our service territory. Certainly, as we also expand in San Joaquin County, SMUD does have CSRs that live in San Joaquin County. So our natural expansion is resulting in some of their CSRs who work from home living in our service territory. So they're in service territory CSRs as well. So, we have a contract I think for 2 more years with SMUD. Okay, so we have 2 more years left on our SMUD contract. Certainly, as we bring that, as we're reviewing that service set, as that contract comes to an end, we're going to evaluate what do we want to do for the various services, customer service, data management, potentially partnering with other CCAs to pursue more shared services with them. I think we're going to kind of keep all of our options on the table, recognizing the priority that we continue to hear from the board about a local call center.
And if I can respond to the questions that were asked, there has been a variety of folks who brought it up, both constituent groups and representatives of those constituent groups on the CAC. I know that there has been discussion about it repeatedly among some of the labor communities that we work with pretty regularly. And I remember how very contentious and heated this particular topic was in our formation. And so mostly just reporting back to this body that this is an item that is coming up, and recognize all of the we can't change a union contract that allows people to work from home, and nor would we want to for all kinds of reasons. But just mostly bringing a heads up that this is something that's been coming up again, and it's been coming up more regularly. And so just wanted to let the board know that it's something that is coming up, and that it might, because my job is to bring back to you what is being talked about in the community, and this is being talked about in the community. So by both the public and members of the CAC.
Okay, thank you. Member Hannon.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to understand a process question, if I may, and I certainly appreciate the challenges that Ms. Eldred faces when community members are raising contentious issues and things of that nature. But I'm also concerned about the limited staff time that's available to address any and all issues. So when the CAC raises an issue for discussion, is that raised to the executive board, who then brings it to the full board? How are these things filtered so that these contentious conversations are somehow addressed by the full board itself, if need be?
So historically, oh, sorry, with permission of the chair.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. So traditionally, like when we first set up, the chair and I had, the chair of the board and the chair of the CAC had twice monthly meetings to go over things that were happening with some participation from staff. As staffing levels have increased, we have more regular communication with CAC liaisons. There are staff present at all of the CAC meetings, and they have been incredibly responsive in like taking a look at what can be addressed at this level and what really needs to get brought to the board. We try and wrap topics together for things that are timely with issues that the board is hearing. So as we get requests for topics, we try and wrap those issues up with what staff is already bringing to the board. And if something is coming up, then it is the responsibility of the chair to bring it to the attention of both the board and staff so that it can be considered for future agenda items.
And the reason I mention that, Madam Chair, is normally when items are brought to staff's attention, they're brought forward, for example, by a city council member asking staff to look into an issue. They're not typically brought forth by members of the community. And the reason I mention that is I'm just concerned about, limited amount of staff time that's available to address these issues, and whether or not issues that this board might consider a higher priority are being set aside to focus on issues that are raised by the community members themselves. So certainly I'll leave it to the executive board to figure out how that's going to be addressed as we move down the road. But it sounds like there's a lot of significant issues that are being raised by the community that may at some point impact this board's ability to get some of the work done that we believe are really priorities of our communities as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Hannon. I appreciate Anna Olivia, you sharing your process, and you've been a wonderful partner on this board. In my city, and my colleagues can let me know if this is true in their cities as well, advisory committees to the city council are advisory committees to the city council, and they direct all of their comments and their recommendations to the city council. So there isn't as much back and forth between the staff and those committees. So it's more of a one-way communication, and then council delegates which of those items of concern need to be referred to city council committees or to future items of the city council. Absent specific direction in our JPA, I would presume that's how it should operate. I'd love to hear from my colleagues. I'm not necessarily interested in sending this to committee to go round and round and round and go into some analysis paralysis. But that is how we operate in my city. And Olivia.
Thank you. So the direction inside of the JPA is that as a ex officio member of the board, the only limitations on my role as, currently I hold the chair, but it's not mine, it's the ex officio board member, is consistent with that of the county. That's how it was adopted. So the only restriction is that of actual voting. And we, just to reassure Member Hannon, we don't bring a bunch of things. When issues come up, we bring them to the attention of staff and the board or the chair, and they prioritize when it gets put onto the agenda. Like any other member, I could say, hey, this is coming up in the public, and the chair of the board decides what gets agendized. I do not. And so we haven't brought very many things to the board over the last years. But when something is coming up in the public, one of the roles of the CAC is to make sure that there is a space for broader public dialogue. And if something is rising to the top, then we bring it to the attention of the board so they know what's happening.
And I appreciate you bringing information to the board. That's absolutely your part of your function, and Olivia. Member Hannon.
Right. Again, just to, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this topic. It's an advisory committee. I'm worried again about the amount of work that they're asking staff to perform, or the number of hours that staff are having to devote to respond to issues raised by the advisory board. I would like to see those somehow filter through the executive board, that the advisory committee is raising an issue that needs further investigation, further input, and have the executive board then work with the executive director to ensure that that work gets done on some reasonable time period. And maybe we need to further articulate that in the JPA. But again, I'm just worried that there may be issues that this board wants to raise, and staff may or may not have the time to do it because of the amount of work that they're being asked to perform by the advisory committee. I'll leave it up to you, Madam Chair, at the executive level to maybe have this conversation and see if there's further clarification that needs to be provided. But maybe in the interim, as tasks are being asked by the advisory committee of staff, that when the CAC gives its report, part of that report includes what are some of those requests that have been made. And so we at least have a sense as to the amount of work the staff are being asked to perform on the request of the advisory committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Hannon. Vice Chair Lopez.
I mean, just comment, I mean, we're listening to the reports each meeting, and there's always the option for the member to do a referral at the end of the meeting based on the feedback. And then that referral can lead to a committee or back to the board. So it could go that way workflow wise. So there's that. And then the other thing too is, I would say, before getting into too much in terms of how workflow is, I think that's something, you know, whether it goes to executive committee or wherever it would go, I think that's something that we would have to talk and look at how the JPA is structured in terms vis-a-vis the advisory committee. I don't like using citizen advisory committee, by the way. I'll just use advisory committee. But you know, maybe have that discussion with our attorney, our staff attorney, and with our staff offline, and figure out sort of how that workflow is designated already legally, you know, and then have that clearly marked. And then I can take that under advisement as the chair of the executive board, and then work with our CEO about how these conversations should happen structurally and process-wise.
So if there's no objection, we can go ahead and send this item to executive committee for discussion. Is that okay, Member Hannon?
Yes, I appreciate that, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's good. All right, now we can, we're going ahead to item 11. This is the ledge update, and I'll turn it over to staff for the presentation. Welcome, Alec.
Great. Thank you all very much. Thank you for having me here tonight. Of course, I'm Alec Ward, the Associate Policy Manager for ABCE. I'm going to give you a run through of essentially how we did this year on the legislative front, state and federal side. I'm cognizant of the clock right now. We've got a lot of bills to run through, so I'm going to make this a little speedy. Can you do the next slide, please? So you've seen this deadline before, this calendar of deadlines. Last opportunity for bills to be voted through was August 31st. The last date for governor to sign and veto was the end of September. The governor ended up signing 997 bills and vetoed 169, which is actually an unusually high ratio of vetoes. You may have caught it in the news, but it turned into a flurry of action in the climate and energy sector at the very end of the session. Most of the slides in this deck are focused on returning to the bills that we've been tracking and took positions on, but there's some big ones up front I'd like to cover that were added at the end of this session. So next slide, please. The biggest bill, of course, SB 846, this extended Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant. Some background, it's the last operating nuclear power plant in California. The large passage, PG&E was set to retire Diablo Canyon 2024 for Unit 1, 2025 Unit 2. The retirement was aligned with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission license expirations. But in August, the governor announced his intent to keep these plants open and requested the federal government allot $1 billion for extension support. And what really fueled this last minute request was that the federal request for funds was due in September. Lawmakers were initially upset by the late proposal, but negotiated with the governor for an eventual, really a wide margin passage, which surprised some. But the reason for this large passage was there's a lot of negotiation between the governor and the Senate and Assembly, negotiated down for 10 years. There's more funding opportunities for liability sources, which might come online and act as an off-ramp for Diablo early. This all also occurred right when the projections for Labor Day shortage were coming, and also it was clear the governor was going to make this a very large priority. So what's in this bill? It permits the extension of Diablo for 5 years beyond planned retirement. It directs various cost recovery mechanisms. I'll cover that briefly on the next slide. It excludes Diablo from any future resource planning except for RA procurement compliance, which the PUC will determine at a later date. It also creates a energy reliability investment plan, which could potentially fund a wide range of different efforts, and that'll be funded at $1 billion. So next slide, please. The funding source will start as from the general fund and upfront loan. Initially, they dedicated $600 million to it. It's expected to be up to $1.4 billion. And then they also will allow the PUC to do a cost recovery through non-bypassable charges. I'll read this really quick. The bill would require the PUC to take certain actions to enable the operator of the Diablo Canyon power plant to recover the reasonable costs and expense of operating Diablo Canyon as provided, including the imposition of fully non-bypassable charge on all customers of electrical corporations, electrical service providers, and community choice aggregators. And then it would require the PUC to authorize the operator to recover in rates an operating fee for each megawatt hour generated by the power plant as specified. So we're going to be watching this very closely, working on it on the agency side, but there is a lot TBD as to impacts on ratepayers for this bill. Next slide, please. Some other big end of bill sessions. Two of the first were budget bills, AB 179, AB 209, dedicating hundreds of millions to equitable building decarb, EV infrastructure, offshore wind, transmission. Now CCAs can qualify for demand side grid service program, which was great to see. And it did expand SCHIP to a $900 million program. Also of note, AB 1279 requires California to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045. Next slide. All right, these are the bills that we were tracking throughout this year and updating you all on. And I'll note the ones that the board took a position on. We're starting right now in the Assembly. So this is AB 1814. We had board support. This authorized CCAs to apply for CPUC funding for transportation electrification. Unfortunately, it faced widespread opposition and was withdrawn by the author. AB 1960 also had board support. It was passed. It was going to add regional diversity to CPUC commissioners. The governor ended up vetoing it, saying that it impedes his power to pick commissioners and that he already considers geographic representation, so the bill is unnecessary. AB 2061, we were watching this bill. It requires data disclosure from EV charging stations, and it orders the CEC to assess reliability and equitability issues. We successfully worked with the author to get some changes here to not make it too burdensome for our EV customers, and it was passed and signed. AB 2667, the board initially actually supported this bill. It would have created a broad CEC fund for customers to adopt DERs, distributed energy resources, but unfortunately the author took out the section of the bill where EBCE could apply for its customers, and then it added, in fact, a language that would harm microgrid development. So we pivoted to an oppose unless amended. The language was taken out, but ultimately the bill failed on the floor. AB 2765 The board supported this, created a new general fund to cover the costs of the CPUC's public purpose programs instead of continuing to rely on electricity rates. Would have been a great help for customer affordability. Unfortunately, though, it did not make it out of the Appropriations Committee. Next page. Thank you. Senate bills that we were tracking, the board had supported SB 1020. If it was amended, it had three parts. The first set new interim targets for California renewable zero carbon goals, 90% by 2035, 95% by 2040. EBC's targets are obviously much higher, so we supported higher goals for others. The second part would have said state agencies must be 100% clean energy by 2035. And we think this is a good idea, but we added an amendment that was successfully included that removes some unnecessary and restrictive requirements here. And then last part was a climate equity and trust fund, which would have helped moving, again, some pieces of a customer's bill into the general fund. But EBC was working with the office and it ended up removing this section completely from the bill. But the bill ended up being passed and was signed. SB 1063, this had board support, authorized the CEC to make new technology standards effective sooner, enabling the commission to accelerate the availability of water use efficiency technologies during drought or in times of stress on the electric grid, and it was passed and signed. SB 1112, supported by the board, it's a technical bill increasing reporting to counties on decarb programs. This would have helped scale tariff on bill programs, financial support, making them a little more accessible to more customers, and it was passed and signed. SB 1136, this bill was opposed unless amended by the board. The bill streamlined CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act, for projects that hit our state's climate goals, but it had some provisions that any new rule or regulation regarding energy efficiency standards would need to do some new requirements, which would have been burdensome and unnecessary analysis and reviews. So we successfully removed that language, but the bill was passed, but vetoed by the governor with concerns that it may hamper environmentally friendly regulations. SB 1158, this was a watch. It changes power source disclosure standards to be more granular. CalCCA worked really hard with the office successfully to make amendments so there are no hangups for CCAs while complying, and the bill was passed and signed. SB 1385 was opposed unless amended. The CPUC, it was requiring the CPUC to establish a utility-owned solar and storage multifamily housing program for each major utility. EBC didn't want the utilities to use this program to poach our customers, so wanted clarification that it wouldn't apply to CCA customers. We were making good grounds here, but it ended up being held in a Appropriations Committee. SB 1393, the board opposed this bill. It would order local governments to obtain approval from the CEC for any local requirements that mandate the replacement of fossil fuel appliances with electric appliances in existing buildings. We saw this as unnecessary and potentially burdensome for cities that were working hard to adopt higher electrification standards. But fortunately, this bill was held in Appropriations Committee. Next slide, please. So we had one massive win, very much worth celebrating on the federal side, and that we had board support on. It was the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, signed by the president after a very, very rocky road, and is now the largest single investment of clean energy in American history. The bill contains $369 billion to invest broadly in climate and energy measures, including clean energy tax credits, $60 billion in environmental justice priorities, and really billions of funding for energy efficiency, building decarb resiliency, and EVs. So we'll be working really hard and already have started implementing and making sure we're all set to access this program throughout the next years to come. So overall, that was the last slide. It was a very successful legislative year. We held off on some many serious attacks on CCAs that popped up, especially at the very end there. And now, in turn, the legislatures have offered tens of billions, and if you count the federal side, hundreds of billions in new funding that we can access to build out even more renewables while making energy more affordable and also further expanding a lot of our great programs. So just want to take a moment to thank the board for all their great support and guidance this year. And we look forward to implementing and accessing these new programs for the year to come. So I can pause here for any questions.
Great, thank you, Alex. Colleagues, are there any questions on the legislative report? Okay, I I'm not seeing any hands from the board. We'll go ahead and go to public comment. As we have a couple of action items before us, let's limit public comment to 1 minute. And go ahead, Mr. Clerk, and grant the speaker 1 minute.
Great. Yes, Blair Beekman, you're recognized for 1 minute. Let me just set my clock. Blair Beekman, you're recognized for 1 minute.
Hi, thank you for being here. Thanks a lot for this item. It's interesting to learn that it's actually a 5-year plan to be starting with for the future of the nuclear plant down in San Luis Obispo. So thank you for that. To also note, a real thank you, I think, is practices more in 2020 and 21, but I've been doing a lot of work in the Southern California area recently, and the practices you developed with a feature of how to talk about fossil fuel use and its use, I suppose, with renewables and the like. You set a really high bar and a really high standard in the Bay Area and Northern California, and how to talk to Sacramento about the issue that I think is going to have really important, good long-term ramifications that I think were important lessons for Southern California. And I just wanted to thank yourselves for the practices at this time. And to conclude, I had something else I wanted to add. A thank you to, I'm interested how area reporting can be on the previous item. That's an interesting concept.
Thank you, Speaker. Are any other speaker cards submitted or members of the public? Mr. Clerk?
We have one person with their hand raised, Jessica Tovar, recognized for 1 minute.
Jessica Tovar with East Bay Clean Power Alliance. Just a quick comment, interested in the Inflation Reduction Act, obviously the federal monies and any California state monies that would be available to address, energy needs and resilience. One really big thing that I hear a lot from community groups is that, having East Bay Community Energy be able to kind of facilitate accessing these very large grants that are very much out of our scope, and being able to distribute that money in the community where it's needed, but also play a role in terms of like the technical assistance that is required for deploying, whether it's electrification, energy efficiency, and specifically microgrids, which is a huge need right now in the community. So I just wanted to add that because it totally applies. And again, that is a great opportunity for East Bay Community Energy to work directly with community-based organizations and make sure that we're accessing the resources and being able to build out the energy resilience.
Thank you. Public comment is good.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, is there any discussion on this item? Any questions that you brought up for Alec on the legislative update? Can you stop share screen, please? Thank you. Just want to make sure I can see everyone to see if there are any hands raised. I see no hands raised, but I will ask Alec, do you have any idea if Assembly Member Lee might bring back his remote meeting public participation bill, and if there's any will to see that again?
I haven't heard any recent updates on that bill in particular. Open to board guidance on how we want to move this upcoming legislative year on an issue like this.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your in-depth report, and we can go ahead and move on. Next up is the Integrated Resource Planning Analysis and Approval for a regular CPUC filing, and I will go ahead and turn it over to staff for the presentation. Welcome, Marie.
Thank you. I am joined by EBCE's Modeler-in-Chief, Doug Allen, this evening. While Adrian, I see the slides pulling up. Thanks, Adrian. We are here, Doug and I are here this evening to request the board's approval to complete our required CPUC required compliance filing, which is due on November 1st, related to the 2022 Integrated Resource Plan analysis. Next slide, please. The Integrated Resource Plan, or IRP, process is a biennial analysis, every other year analysis. All CPUC jurisdictional load serving entities are required to complete this analysis and submit to the Public Utilities Commission a procurement plan that describes the resources in our current portfolios and lays out hypothetical resources that we might add to our portfolios in the coming years. We are also required to describe the contributions to emissions of these portfolios of generating and energy storage resources. The planning and evaluation timeline typically goes out 10 years. This year's analysis looked from current year, or really 2024, more specifically out to 2035. And it is worth noting that the analysis and the hypothetical planning process can actually result in the CPUC ordering procurement mandates of its jurisdictional entities. In fact, the next topic on the agenda is me asking for the board's approval to execute some long-term contracts to meet the procurement mandates that are the result of one of the CPUC's IRP related procurement mandates. Next slide, please. Excuse me. When we think about the deliverables associated with the Integrated Resource Plan, on the CPUC side, we have to do an analysis and file 3 documents with the Public Utilities Commission. One is a narrative document that describes the work that we did and describes the resources in the hypothetical portfolio. And then the next 2 documents are actually Excel workbooks, rather large, very detailed Excel workbooks. One is called the Resource Data Template that describes the generating and energy storage resources in our real and hypothetical portfolio. And the next is the Clean System Power Calculator, that it is the tool that is used to estimate the emissions associated with the portfolio. While this is a compliance deliverable, a CPUC compliance deliverable, we actually do get some benefit from doing this work. So we seek the EBC board's approval on our analysis and all of the compliance materials, and to complete the compliance requirement, the filing on November 1st. But the benefit of this work is that it provides insights to EBCE staff on some of the potential drivers of costs. It gives us a high level view on the types of resources that may be available in the future, and how those resources could perform in the marketplace. And it helps us identify threats to achieving our board approved goal of having 0 emissions associated with our retail electric demand by 2030. And what can we do to mitigate any of the potential challenges to reducing our emissions and having no emissions for our retail demand by 2030. Next slide, please. We're going to give you some of the key takeaways of our analysis before we get into details of what the analysis uncovered and details of what the resource makeup of our hypothetical real and then hypothetical portfolio are. So one of the benefits of this analysis is we got some information about what if we were to build the portfolio that the hypothetical analysis, that the compliance analysis suggests, we have visibility into what hours EBCE's electric demand would be exposed to the ISO energy market. We also are able to do some stress testing of the portfolio and get a sense of what are some of the market disruptions and the things that could put our this hypothetical portfolio at risk. Some of the the limitations of this analysis are that the assumptions that go into the modeling process are actually quite prescriptive. Most notably, the Public Utilities Commission provides some input data related to the costs of underlying resources like solar, wind, energy storage resources. The CPUC did not make up these costs themselves. They got this cost assumption data from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, NREL. And while it's a good data source, it is outdated. This NREL list of resource costs is from 2020, and unfortunately, what we've seen in the marketplace in the last couple of years is that the costs of new resources have increased dramatically as compared to a year ago and as compared to a couple of years ago. So while we expect that pointing to a standardized data set about the underlying costs of resources will always be a little bit outdated, because of what's going on in the marketplace right now and the massive impact that COVID has had on supply chain. And we've seen costs for everything from milk to eggs to timber used for construction. All of the costs of everyday products have increased. That has happened to the components that go into building renewable and carbon-free energy resources as well. So the underlying cost assumptions that are feeding into our modeling inputs are very outdated, unfortunately, and are just not reflective of what is happening in the world right now. These inputs also don't reflect regulatory realities, or are not totally up to date with regulatory realities. Another point that is worth noting, our EBCE's board direction is to achieve a zero emission portfolio for our retail demand by 2030. We'll talk about this more in a couple of slides, but the IRP analysis does not look at retail demand, it looks at wholesale demand. And there is a difference between these two things. And so it is impossible to have zero emissions for our wholesale portfolio. It's impossible because the Public Utilities Commission actually requires us to include emissions for certain resources called behind the meter combined heat and power plants that are not actually part of our portfolio, but exist in the state of California. And so every load serving entity gets a pro rata allotment of these are your emissions associated with this resource type. And then we will talk about other challenges associated with having a low or zero emissions portfolio in coming slides. But the issues related to emissions are one of the big takeaways of this analysis. We use one emissions counting methodology from the Power Source Disclosure Report, or the PSDR, when it comes to reporting to our board and to our customers, the citizens that live in our community, what the emissions are associated with the energy that we buy for them. But the IRP uses a totally different counting methodology, and EBCE we don't have a choice in how we account for emissions or which emissions accounting approach we use in the Power Source Disclosure Report. It is mandated in the regulatory space. So there's just a misalignment, a legislative or regulatory misalignment in terms of how we account for emissions in different places. And that is challenging. It's hard to explain. It's hard to explain to the board. It's hard to explain to our community, and it's confusing for staff members as well. Next slide, please. In terms of looking at the portfolio that the IRP analysis suggests might be of value to us, when we think about energy storage or battery energy storage, we typically think about large batteries that can charge and discharge energy for 4 hours. 4 hours is the standard. We think of a long duration storage resource as something that can charge and discharge for 8 hours, 8 hours charging, 8 hours discharging. It's noteworthy that our IRP analysis suggests that there's value to 6 hours of charging and discharging. We're paying attention to this, but we look at it with a little bit of uncertainty because, as I mentioned, the cost assumptions that underlie this analysis are the best available for standardization purposes, but we don't think that they are cost assumptions that we should fully hang our hats on and expect will be realistic. We also note that the portfolio that the model suggests we move forward with requires that we sign contracts for a lot of offshore wind. Offshore wind in California is a nascent product at best. There are no offshore wind resources developed yet. And in fact, I believe it's the Bureau of Land Management, don't quote me on that agency. There is a federal agency that is actually just starting the process of auctioning off leases for offshore land, for offshore properties, to begin the process of developing offshore wind resources. There's just a lot of uncertainty as to when, if, how long it will take to develop offshore wind, the costs associated with it. And so it's something that we are interested in and we'll look into getting more information on. But when we think about having a portfolio in the future that has a lot of offshore wind in it, we should look at that with a certain grain of salt. And then, as I've already highlighted, staff has a lot of uncertainty about how much we can rely on the cost assumptions that really underlie this analysis, given the disruption that we see in the marketplace and the increased costs that we are seeing, and that I will talk about on the next agenda item when I'm asking for board approval to sign some long-term contracts. Next slide. So the next steps in this process, we are required to complete our CPUC compliance filing, to file the narrative and the resource data template and clean system power calculator on November 1st. And so we are seeking board approval of the analysis that we've done so that we can make that filing on November 1st. But in the coming months, likely in early 2023, we want to rerun this analysis, just for EBCE educational purposes, and we want to incorporate just the city of Stockton into our load. When we started this, Stockton had not officially voted to become a part of EBCE. At the same time, the entire resource adequacy paradigm, the whole compliance workspace is being redesigned, and we don't know what the new rules are going to be exactly. Those new rules should start being put into implementation in 2024. And so we'd like to look at what looks like the right portfolio of resources for EBCE with Stockton and with the new resource adequacy rules. And we also want to bring in a lot of our IRP analysis process in-house, if you will. We have, for the last three IRP filings, we have worked with consultants, and those have been very successful filings. But as much as there are limitations to the analysis, there is a lot that we learn in doing this. And so we want to have this be more of an ongoing process, not something where it's like we're reinventing the wheel every time we need to do a long-term planning analysis. We want to be constantly looking at long-term planning and thinking about what is the marketplace, what does the current marketplace and the current view of the future suggest would result in valuable resources for our long-term resource portfolio going forward. And then after we've done this supplemental analysis, we'd like to come back to the board and provide just an informational item after we've done that. So probably 6-ish months from now. Next slide. Doug.
Yep. So I'm going to go through some of the kind of requirements that we used when putting together this study. These were given to us by the CPUC largely, and then a little bit about the modeling framework. So the first thing to kind of note, the CPUC really assigns us the loads that we must meet for our customers. So this is a little bit of a back and forth that comes out of the Integrated Energy Policy Report process. And we had some say in it, but at the end of the day, the CEC and the CPUC work together to make sure that the energy that they're procuring or they're modeling for the whole state going forward is the sum of every LSE's individual energy. And so That's one of the things that the CPUC kind of mandates for us. And you'll notice this 2035 load, it's at about 7.5 terawatt hours or 7,540 gigawatt hours. That does not include, as Marie mentioned, Stockton. So we would expect that to be, higher by probably at least a terawatt hour with kind of just the addition of that load. But if you look at that 2035 load, relative to the amount of load that remains with PG&E's bundled service, you'll see we have about 25% of PG&E's bundled service size, again, without Stockton, and that yields the GHG emission cap that we need to hit in the two different scenarios. So PG&E bundled customers have about 3.1 million metric tons. We have about 0.78. So we're about 25% of the PG&E total. And that goes down further in the kind of more restrictive 25 MMT scenario. And I want to be clear, these are kind of minimum performance thresholds. There's nothing preventing us from aiming lower. And I think that's kind of consistent with the direction that we've gotten from the board. We're trying to come in below those numbers, but our portfolio has to be at that number or below for the CPUC to accept it as a compliant portfolio. Next slide, please, Adrian. So many of the members of the executive committee might have seen this already. I just want to go real quickly through how we modeled this problem out. It really consists of 3 steps. The first step takes a look at the entire state. It says, given the loads that the CPUC is projecting over the next 10, 20 years, the legislative goals that we have, what does the statewide system look like in the future? What will we have to add on a state level to make sure that we have adequate resources to keep the lights on all the time, and we're cleaning our grid in accordance with our state's climate goals? The second step really takes that build out that we see and says, okay, in that future, what are the prices that EBCE is going to be dealing with? What do they look like? Right now, we generally see prices are higher when load is high because we're going deeper into the resource stack and getting into less efficient resources. What we expect to see over the next 10, 20 years as we add a lot more solar to the state system is kind of an inversion of that. Prices will probably go lower during the middle of the day when the solar is really present, and we might even see negative prices as we have more solar than our system really needs. And then overnight, when the solar goes offline and maybe the wind isn't blowing, that's when we're going to see higher prices. So as we look at this problem, as we try to think of what should EBCE buy for the next 20 years, we want to make sure that we're not just buying things that perform well in the market right now, but they perform well in the market going forward. And then finally, we take that kind of statewide price and resource context, and we say, given that and given our goals and the direction from the board on climate goals and our expectations about the growth of Renewable 100, given all of those things, what resources should we procure in the short term to really minimize our costs? And I want to just highlight one thing that appears on this slide. The steps 1 and 3 especially are optimization models. So they take a bunch of parameters and say, here is the best thing that you can do. So step 1 will get you the best build out for the state, given the parameters that you supply. And step 3 will give you the best build out for EBCE, given the parameters that you supply. So it's really important to keep in mind as we do this, that parameter definition, as Marie was saying, there's questions about the kind of freshness of the costs. There's questions about the definitions of these different emissions accounting methodologies. All of those are turned into parameters that the model looks at, and tuning those parameters is really kind of one of the key knowledge activities of this study. Next slide, please. So what we did to generate our portfolios, we really wanted to have a single preferred conforming portfolio that said, regardless of what world we find ourselves in, whether we're going to 25 million metric tons or 30 million metric tons by 2035 as a state, we want to make decisions in the near term that put us in the best position to meet our requirements and serve our load affordably in either setting. So we took some of those parameters, defined them a little differently. And that meant that our compliance portfolio differs a little bit from just kind of taking the CPUC's preferred system plan and saying, oh, we'll do our share of it. So there are some benefits to this. The model that we're using, it's a different model, but we spent a lot of time making sure it was benchmarked appropriately. We don't have to worry as much about having differences between what we think and what the CPUC thinks that might affect whether our submitted plan is considered conforming. It's defensible. This is the result. The numbers that go into these models are the result of a long public stakeholder process that tries to get as much agreement from all these different parties as possible. So these are very defensible assumptions. And then as we can, we try to incorporate our specific views of resource availability and portfolio fit for our customers. Some of the limitations, again, as Marie mentioned, the way that the model optimizes for emissions is different than the way that this Clean System Power tool accounts for emissions, and is different still than the reporting that we use for the PSDR compliance. And that's something that we're looking to improve going forward, but we are dealing with that issue as we're putting together these portfolios. And then again, as we've said, the resource costs might be slightly out of date. And then on the bottom, you can see we have kind of the comparison, the CalISO load, EBCE's load, and we see we're growing as a percentage of the CalISO over time. But again, this does not include, because the implementation plan had not been updated yet, this does not include any Stockton load. Next slide, Adrian, and I will pass it back over to Marie.
In this and the next two slides, we're showing you different views of what our portfolio of resources could look like going out to 2035. On this slide in particular, the table on the left with the yellow header, those are resources, those are long-term contracts that EBCE has actually executed. So you can think of those as real. A number of them have already come online, and we are working to bring other of those resources online right now. The table on the right are candidate resources. These are ideas. This is the hypothetical portfolio. These are ideas of projects that the model thinks will be valuable to EBCE to help us reduce emissions and keep costs down and achieve our organizational goals and contribute to reliability in the state. If costs materialize, if costs of projects materialize the way that NREL and the CPUC are forecasting that they will. Next slide, please. This is another view of the same information. It has merged the real, the actual contracted resources and the hypothetical candidate resources into one graph. But it's worth noting that the amount of long-term solar resources in the portfolio, or the percent composition of the portfolio, increases a little and then decreases going out to 2035, and that's because solar is not as valuable in the capacity landscape. As we get more and more solar on the system, it's already becoming less valuable. You will note that there's a lot of wind in this portfolio, and I spoke about offshore wind and how the model suggests that offshore wind could be really valuable to us, and that there's a lot of uncertainty associated with offshore wind in California. And then I also noted the uncertainty around lithium-ion batteries, and do we want 4-hour, 6-hour, 8-hour batteries? Whether it's lithium-ion or some other form of energy storage, there's even uncertainty there. Next slide, please. This is fundamentally the same as the previous slide, but rather than showing information as a graph, it's showing in terms of nameplate capacity, megawatts of each resource type. Next slide.
Okay, now I'll take back over. This chart shows us over the next, out until 2035, where is the energy that we use to serve our customers' demands coming from? And this gets to that point that we were talking about a little earlier, where the accounting leaves a little space for market purchases in our portfolio, even as we hit 100% of retail sales from renewable, like RPS eligible resources. So you can see that basically in this chart. One thing to note, especially behind the meter solar is not counted towards our kind of retail sales. It is subtracted out of the top because it's behind the meter. So it's not counted towards our generation, and it's not counted towards our load. So that's why the yellow goes above that retail sales line in the out years. But you can see, in 2024, we're still, a little short of our retail sales as a percentage from renewable resources. But by 2030, the resources that we have contract with are supplying all of our retail sales from renewable resources. Next slide, please, Adrian. So, the cost and revenue portions of the portfolio, it's a very tricky question for us for a couple of reasons. First, there's the questions about the costs of the resources, whether those 2020 costs are accurate or not. And then beyond that, when you ask about what do our revenues look like going forward, our revenues aren't really tied at the moment to our costs. Right now, we peg our rates to PG&E, we take a discount off of that. So really what we're focused on in the near term before we make that transition to cost of service pricing, if we choose to do that, our focus really is keeping those costs low. And I think you can see that in this portfolio with the assumptions that the CPUC provided, we're able to keep our costs at a pretty current level while cleaning our portfolio really substantially. I think that's really the takeaway from the cost portion of this. We will always be trying as hard as possible to lower costs in every area that we can, but we are not putting together a portfolio that from where we stand right now is expected to raise rates and really impose more hardship and more costs on our customers. We want to keep costs low. And as we go forward, a transition to cost-based pricing would allow us to pass those cost savings directly along to our customers through our rates. Next slide, please, Adrian. So real quick, this, I don't want to spend too much time on this slide. This shows both of our portfolios, our single conforming portfolio conforms under both the 25 MMT case and the 30 MMT case, because what we did was make sure that the resources that we had added were able to meet the requirement regardless of what it is. And so that's especially important because in these next few years, as we're making these decisions that kind of lock us into contracts farther down the road, we want to make sure that we are not planning for one future and seeing another one. So we really wanted to put together a case and a plan that says, that uncertainty, we're able to handle it either way. Next slide, please, Adrian. So I want to talk real quickly about market exposure and what we learned. I think this is kind of the biggest takeaway from the study in my mind. What we learned about the market exposure is this optimization model that is really interested in, the number one thing it's doing is meet all these other requirements that you've set, but then bring down costs as low as possible. When I looked at it, I looked at this sample week in July 2030, and I was a little surprised that there was not as much solar as I might have expected. I would have expected we'd have a long portfolio during July and have more solar production than our customers could really use, or that even our storage could soak up. And I wasn't really seeing that. And I figured out why when I went to look at the sample week in April. And what we see in the sample week in April is we're pretty long in April. We have more energy coming out of our resources than our customers are using. And so then we would be selling it back into the market. And the reason that this kind of constrains the portfolio, apologies, my cat is very interested in this. The reason that this really constrains the portfolio is to add additional energy in that push us closer to the load line in 2030, we would end up selling more electricity in April. We'd be long in April. And next slide, please, Adrian. You can see from the chart of this is how much we are interacting with the market on top. So blue is we are selling into the market. Red is we are buying from the market. And then on the bottom, you see the prices. Blue is negative, red is high. So were we to add more resources to serve that July load, we would end up selling electricity into the market at times when we actually have to pay people to take it. And that's those negative prices. So the model is really reluctant to put more resources into our portfolio that's going to increase our long position during those spring months. Next slide, please, Adrian.
I think that actually, yeah, that toggles back to me, but I just want to drive home the point that Doug just made, and that is that even with storage, energy storage in our portfolio, the model recognizes that EBCE, if you sign too many solar contracts, you will end up with more solar generation in the middle of the day during times of the year when the state doesn't need it, and you would be paying the state to take your energy, then you could absorb with your storage. And so you would be financially harming your customers if you sign up for too much solar generation. Some solar good, too much solar bad. Going back to talking about emissions counting, Doug and I sort of went over very quickly and said single preferred resource portfolio or single preferred conforming portfolio. Nothing about that phrase, moves off my tongue very easily. But the point of having a single portfolio of resources that we are turning into the Public Utilities Commission that can meet the obligations of the two situations that the Public Utilities Commission wants us to look at. The point of having one portfolio of resources that we put forward is that we are able to say if the Public Utilities Commission thinks that we as a state are moving towards one situation, the 30 million metric ton future, we can recommend a portfolio of resources that will help us achieve that and also allow us to achieve EBCE's more stringent emissions reduction goals. If the Public Utilities Commission decides, you know what, California is actually moving towards a 25 million metric tons emissions future, the same portfolio of resources can meet the statewide more stringent goals for emissions reductions and still meet EBCE's stringent emissions reductions goals. So that point is actually significant, that the portfolio of resources that we think could be valuable if they are offered to us at prices that are desirable and at prices that are somewhat similar to what the model thinks could happen in the future. If that happens, then those are the types of resources that we would want to contract with in the future. But there are a lot of ifs in the sentence that I just said. Okay, now talking about emissions. I mentioned this a few slides ago. There's a disconnect between the two emissions counting methodologies that we rely on today. There used to be a third one, but with the climate registry, we don't even use that one anymore. When we do our annual power source disclosure report and power content label analysis and compliance work, and when we send mail to our customers saying this is what your power content label was and this is how many emissions are associated with it, that's this slide, if you will. And that uses one counting methodology, and it looks at what are the emissions associated with the energy that you use to meet your retail demand. We are required to use that emissions counting methodology. I'm pretty sure, don't hold me to this, I'm pretty sure it is a legislative mandate. It might be regulatory, but I think it is a legislative mandate. And this also ties to, is very related to how we look at what is the content of renewable energy in your portfolio. We measure renewable energy based on retail demand, not wholesale. Next slide, please. And it's also worth noting that our board approved goal to have zero emissions is associated with our retail demand. What the CPUC looks at is not retail demand, it is wholesale demand, which means it's basically resale demand plus approximately 5 to 7%. That's where there are losses on the system. So EBCE actually transacts for retail demand plus about 5 to 7%, but that 5 to 7% never gets tagged to our customers. When we look at the portfolio of resources that the IRP analysis is recommending that we transact on, we can have 100, in this case, in the IRP model case, we can have 100% renewable resources to meet EBCE's retail demand, but there is still a little bit of energy that would be procured from unspecified power sources or procured through the energy market. And according to the modeling analysis, getting to 100% renewable energy for our retail customers, but still having a little exposure to the wholesale market to unspecified power is the most cost-effective and reliable way to meet EBCE's goals and stay below the CPUC, the IRP methodology of emissions counting goals for limiting emissions associated with our overall portfolio. I think that's the key takeaway on this slide. Next slide, please.
So we'll talk a little bit about the results here. And this is one of those, this is an area where I think it can be really confusing because the numbers that you're seeing here are entirely a artifact of the modeling choices and don't actually represent a real difference in the performance. So the modeling tool that we used, according to the constraints that we put, it achieved a 100% RPS by 2030, including curtailment of any of our renewable resources if they were not deliverable. When we put that same portfolio into the CSP renewable portfolio standard calculation contains its own assumptions about the shape of the resources that we would get and the extent to which they would be curtailed during given hours. So while our model said, you hit 100%, you were at 100% in 2030 and beyond, in the state accounting, the CSP tool, we did not necessarily see that. You can see that yellow line on the graph to the lower right is a little bit below. And so that is one thing that we want to be kind of tracking as we're doing additional analyses going forward is we could have spent a lot of time going back and forth to make sure that what was reflected in the CSP is exactly the same as what was modeled in GridPath, or we modeled extra resources in GridPath to account for those differences in the CSP. But in both cases, these are, kind of constructed futures. And instead, just making sure that we're on the same page about the goals that we have, the resource mix that we have along the way, and where we're headed is pretty important. Next slide, please, Adrian. Then finally, I think this is our last slide. The preferred conforming portfolio, we wanted to show you, this is what we will be submitting to the CPUC. One line item that I really want to draw attention to, you have that CHP line item that says, even if we didn't buy any system power at all, we would still get some share of emissions. So we can't get that down to zero. And then also you see that we have system power emissions that starts at about 1 million metric tons per year, goes down to about 0.5 by 2035. That is that kind of wholesale portion, the difference between retail and wholesale, that we're transacting to shape and balance our renewable resources, and that leads to those emissions. And then finally, that last table, you can see that difference I was talking about a little bit. In the model that we used, 2030 and 2035 both had 100% RPS eligible delivered renewable percentage. when we put it through the CSP, that comes down. And so it will be important to kind of track the evolution of those things going forward to make sure that we are in line to meet the goals set out by the board. I think that is the last slide, and we are available for questions.
Oh, I don't think there are going to be any questions. We got that 100%, all of us. Thank you for the in-depth presentation, and I was really delighted with myself when I started following along with that last graph between the CSP and grid path modeling. I actually got what you were saying for a moment there, Doug. So thank you for that. I appreciated that. The colleagues, certainly there probably are questions. So this is the time for clarifying questions. Member Cal.
Thanks for the in-depth presentation and the preparing all the necessary reports for UC. Just one thing, this is a little tangential, but maybe not that much. You mentioned the importance or the reality of the potential of too much solar because of the time of day and so on and so forth, and I can get that. By now, we've all heard about this wind solar storage project in Oregon. Is this going to be a thing? I mean, can our next solicitation invite people to have that combination project, which might help at least partly address that time of day thing?
So let me intervene. I don't think that a specific so that's an interesting project because I think the co-location is interesting from a transmission perspective because you have, there's a pipeline and you want to, day or night, there's the same amount of energy, so you want to pair them so you can have a firm product. I think for us, that might be interesting. I think you could construct that by having a wind project in New Mexico, a solar project in Southern California, and a battery in Oakland. And you could manage those three resources effectively the same way. So I think we're going to tend to be more focused on trying to figure out how we most cost effectively bring all those solutions together. It could end up being 3 projects co-located because that's the most effective way to
if we do a solicitation thing that, hey, anybody want to give us one of these? We'll listen to this too. Just let them know that we're open to it. That's all. But yeah, I get what you're saying. Thank you.
Great. Member Hannon.
Yes, just a clarification, if I may. And I did read about the notion of auctioning off offshore wind opportunities coming forward in the near future. And it looks like we're going to be somewhat relying on that as an energy source in the year 2030. Though, Marie, you mentioned there's a significant amount of uncertainty around that. But then as I heard you speak, Doug, it sounds like we understand that and we have other energy resources in the portfolio that we can look to should that not come to fruition. Did I understand that correctly then?
That is correct. We actually plan to go out to market in calendar year 2023 with a request for information to start to learn about offshore wind, the costs, the development challenges, et cetera, associated with what is in the United States a new resource type. So we are interested in it. We want to learn more and start to do the work so that if we can have these projects coming online in 2030, great, we'll be prepared to do so. And if they are cost effective, we'll be signing those projects up. If they are not cost effective, or if it just doesn't materialize because of something anything that could happen, we will be looking for other projects to backfill that energy and that capacity.
Thank you.
Great. Seeing no other board hands raised, I will ask the clerk if there's any public comment on this item.
There is one person with their hand raised. Blair Beekman, I'll recognize you for
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Hi, Blair Beekman here. Thanks a lot for this item. Boy, it was very clarifying for myself. Thank you. Where to start? I guess first, for the future of our solar projects, I think however we talk about the future of solar and storage, we have to really, boy, there's an ambulance going on right by me. I'm really sorry. It won't stop. We have to be talking about the future of wage theft issues, worker rights issues for, all the rare earth minerals that are going to be mined across the world for our solar future. That always has to be on our minds as we work towards our renewable future. It just has to be. With that said, I was very impressed with how you talked about the use of solar. I mean, I was talking about these reports in 2020. You were explaining your solar use, and you were also at the same time, you were limiting solar in the future, while at the same time you were building the future of fossil fuels. And that was very disconcerting to myself. And in 2020, there was a lot of little tiny scuttlebutt going on. Are we going to be having a possible earthquake coming up soon in the Bay Area? So I put those two things together, and I would be asking yourselves often if that was the case. Over the past few years, I've learned to quiet that question down, and at this point you really fully explained what exactly those statistics may have been saying in 2020. So thank you for that. And to conclude, in your most recent reporting of the IPR this year, or IRP this year, I'm concerned that you don't quite know how to talk about all the additional nuclear dirty fossil fuel that's a part of the process. It's all in this kind of middle ground that we have to learn to be clear about. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes public comment.
Thank you. Colleagues, for a resolution that approves the results of the IRP analysis and authorizes staff to submit the 2020 IRP compliance filing to the CPUC. Is there any discussion before we do that? Chair Eldred.
Thank you. Just wanted to say that the CAC recommends supporting the staff's recommendation. I did have some questions on this, but considering the time, I will hold them.
Great, thank you. Colleagues, any, Vice Chair Lopez.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you very much, Marie, and for your amazing work here. Very comprehensive. I've had the pleasure of being able to hear this twice, in eBoard and in here. I want to just, I don't know if the community can see how much work you put in, but there's also, apart from what we just had, there's a attached staff report and a glossary. This is really like a primer of the work that you do. I mean, it's very, I know you really distilled it down. It's very complicated work, and I'm just so glad the two of you are on the team. And be able to sleep better at night when we have subject matter experts such as yourself. So thank you.
Very good. I will agree with all of those comments, and it's, it would be one thing just to do what the regulatory agency was asking us to do, but on top of that, all the additional modeling that's done to ensure that we have a secure future and that we're doing what we set out to do with our local board policies. I think it's very commendable. So colleagues, we have a resolution before us. Can I get a motion on the resolution? I have a motion from Member Cowell, and can I take a second from Member Kavanaugh and ask the clerk to please call the roll?
Great, thank you very much. Alameda County. Alameda County. Albany.
Yes.
Thank you. Berkeley. Berkeley. Come back to Berkeley. Dublin.
Yes.
Fremont.
Yes.
Hayward.
Yes.
Livermore.
Yes.
Newark.
Aye.
Oakland.
Aye.
Piedmont.
Aye.
Pleasanton.
Aye.
Tracy.
Yes.
Union City.
Aye.
San Leandro.
Aye.
Emeryville.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Do you want to check back with Berkeley again, or just send her a note?
Yes. Berkeley. I'll send her a note.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And we will now move on to the long-term energy and resource adequacy contracts for approval. I will ask staff for the next two items if they could just exercise some brevity, noting the hour. Thank you.
It's me again. Next slide, please. Now I'm here today to seek the board's approval for the CEO to finish negotiations and execute 2 long-term contracts. Next slide, please. EBCE went to market seeking long-term resources, and we did this in partnership with San Jose Community Energy. We went to market with our RFO in February of 2022, and we were looking for resources that met 2 purposes. One, to contribute to a CPUC mandated procurement obligation that we have for midterm reliability resources that come online in 2023, 24, 25, and 26, and so that we could sign more long-term contracts for carbon-free and renewable energy resources to meet the needs of our communities going out for multiple years. Next slide. This is a list of all of the different products that we requested in the RFO. I'll skip over describing all of them, but I will just say that if you go back in the materials and look at the names of the products, they're kind of wonky, but they actually relate to are the same as specific resource types or descriptions of resources that the Public Utilities Commission mandated that we go out and buy. Next slide. We had reasonably robust participation in our RFO, but not as robust as our last RFO that was released in 2020. This time around, we got offers for 44 unique project sites, whereas in 2020, we got offers for 70 project sites, and every project site had different offer variations associated with it. We got offers for a variety of different resources. They were in different states: California, Arizona, Idaho, New Mexico, Nevada, Oregon. And you will note the slide says only 1 project in EBCE's service territory. That is not correct. At the time that I started working on these slides, EBCE's service territory included only Alameda County and the city of Tracy. We did actually have offers for Stockton, and one of the projects I'm seeking approval for today is in Stockton. Next slide. In evaluating the offers we received, we used the same evaluation rubric we have used for our last 2. This is now the 3rd RFO that we've done using the same evaluation rubric. We primarily look at the quantitative value that we forecast associated with a resource that is offered to us, and then there are also qualitative criteria that we consider, things like is the developer using union and local workforce? Is it a project that is in our service territory? That's our number 1 preference. Is it in Northern California? Number 2 preference. Is it in California? Number 3 preference, and so on and so forth. Next slide. I'm seeking approval for 2 projects today. They are with the same developer. The developer is called Broad Reach Power, and I'll get into the details of each project in the next 2 slides. Next slide, please. I want to note right now that there is a typo on these slides, and there is a typo in the board resolution for these 2 projects. The Cascade project is in Stockton. The NUSA project is in San Joaquin County. It is actually in Ripon. And so I wanted to just flag for the board. I am not sure. I reference the fact in the board resolutions, I say that NUSA is in Stockton. That is incorrect. The Cascade project is in Stockton. So I wanted to flag this for the board and seek guidance from Adrian or Inder as to whether I need to redo the board resolutions before they are executed.
You do not. I think we can have in the motion, just have a motion that sort of reflects the fact that they should be inverted.
I'll make an amendment. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, great. So the first project is the Cascade Energy Storage Resource Project. EBCE will contract for 5 megawatts of resource adequacy capacity. The whole battery will be 99 megawatts of energy storage built in Stockton. We are contracting for only 5 megawatts because there are some very specific technical rules that allow a project to count for resource adequacy. And so in 2024, when the project will come online, only a portion of it will be allowed to count for resource adequacy, the resource adequacy program. Later on in 2026, the rest of the battery will be able to count. We're not doing an option contract. We're signing a contract for 5 megawatts that counts right now, right when a project comes online in 2024. Maybe in the future, we'll consider getting more resource adequacy from this project. It will be a 10-year contract, and I just mentioned 2024. It should come online on June 1st of 2024. Next slide, please. The NUSA project is a 60 megawatt energy storage facility in San Joaquin County in a small town called Ripon. EBCE is contracting for half of it, for half of the resource adequacy, 30 megawatts. San Jose is taking the other 30 megawatts. This will also be a 10-year contract. It will also come online on June 1st of 2024. Both of these projects are quite a ways along in the development process. They have interconnection agreements, they have site control. These are very real projects, and both projects are committed to using union labor, local labor, and paying prevailing wages. Next slide. Broadreach is a fairly new company. It was formed in 2019, but the people that comprise the organization are very experienced. They are also financially very well backed. They currently have 350 megawatts of battery projects online. I believe they are all in Texas, and they have 10 gigawatts of battery projects in their development pipeline. Because they are such a new development shop, they only have one contract executed with a CCA, and that is with Redwood Coast Energy for a project that should come online in May of 2023. Next slide. I will be coming back to the board probably in November and then definitely in December, seeking authority to execute more contracts associated with this RFO, and you will see this slide in the future. Today, I am only asking authority to finish negotiations and sign 2 contracts, the 2 Broadreach contracts here. They happen to only be resource adequacy contracts. As we move forward and I ask for authority to sign more contracts, there will be storage contracts where we get all of the attributes of the energy storage. There will be contracts for generating resources as well. It's just that today, these are only resource adequacy contracts. Next slide. So the next step is for us to finish negotiating these contracts and then for Nick and Inder to execute the contracts. And as I just mentioned, I will be coming back to the board through the fall and into the winter for additional contract approvals. We will continue to monitor the progress of these resources and the existing resources in our portfolio as they mature and come online. And then these projects, because they are specifically to meet CPUC compliance obligations, we will be reporting to the CPUC along mandated timelines about the status of resources in our portfolio and how they are progressing in their development and making sure that they come online. And that is the end.
Great, thank you, Maria. It was helpful to have this in combination with the IRP presentation. We can see how all the pieces fit together. Colleagues, are there any clarifying questions on these 2 contracts that are before us? If you see no questions from the board, we will go to public comment. And Mr. Clerk, please give the public speaker 1 minute.
Blair Beekman, you are recognized for 1 minute.
Hi, Blair Beekman here. I thought this item was going to be more about energy trading issues for long-term energy trading issues, but it was more about projects themselves. And the project that you're working on with San Jose, was framed really nicely to talk about its union involvement. That was interesting to hear and learn about. The fact that you and San Jose are both working on it, boy, it just really brightens my heart. It just feels like a really good fit, a really good teamwork effort that I've been always interested to hear, and it's nice to see take place. A real good luck to yourselves with the call-in issues in the future of ABCE, call-in center issues that I feel can be, if you can work out your differences of union issues with it, I feel, the call-in centers can be an invitation to what can eventually be job centers. And from job centers based on union concepts, it can invite non-union also.
Thank you. That concludes public comment.
Thank you. Colleagues, we have a resolution before us. Is there any discussion on this item before we take a motion? I will go, Member Ariola.
Just really quick, Chair, thank you. I just want to acknowledge the staff as our one San Joaquin County representative. I really want to thank and acknowledge staff that as we moved into San Joaquin County, I really wanted to state that we were investing in our new communities and just seeing that San Joaquin County continues to keep coming up. I know that our new residents very much appreciate it, and that you're putting our money where our mouth is, and it is not unseen. So thank you for the work. And I also appreciate the local prevailing wages and union support.
Thank you, and I'll mention myself that every time we do a solicitation, we hear from the board and we hear from the public that we want extra weight on those in-territory projects, and here we are. So I think staff deserves a pat on the back for making it happen, and really glad to see this Cascade project coming up in Stockton, and as we expand, I hope to see more in-territory projects just like this. So I will, with your indulgence, I'll go ahead and make the motion because I'd like to include the amendment to correct the locations of Noosa and Cascade, as Cascade being in Stockton and Noosa being in Ripon, California. So there's a motion on the table. Member Hannon.
Second that motion, Madam Chair.
And there's a second from Member Hannon, and I will ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Thank you. Alameda County. Alvin.
Yes.
Berkeley.
Yes.
Evelyn. Evelyn.
Yes.
Thank you. Tremont.
Yes.
Hayward.
Yes.
Livermore.
Yes.
York.
Aye.
Oakland.
Aye.
Devon.
Aye.
Pleasanton.
Aye.
Tracy.
Yes.
Union City.
Aye.
San Leandro.
Aye.
Maryville.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Thank you very much. All right, we are on to item 14, which is the update to net energy metering policy. And we've got Kelly here to present for us here in person. And Kelly, will you remind us before you get started on your presentation, which committees have seen this item already? Because I know we've been.
Sure thing. I'll also try this microphone and see if it works.
If it doesn't,
If it doesn't, I'll just talk loud. So, yes, good evening. So this has already gone through the executive committee. Okay, just 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. So yeah, good evening. I will try and make this as brief as possible. My name is Kelly Ruska. I'm the Director of Account Services, here to discuss an update to our net energy metering policy. Adrian, if you could go to the next slide, and I'm actually going to skip a couple of these since you have this in your packet, and I'll get to just the meat of the heart of the request. If you could go to one more slide here. There we go. So here's our staff proposal. Today we have just one option for our net energy metering customers. That's a monthly true up. I'm recommending that we offer our customers a choice of both a monthly true up and an annual true up.
We did do a brief survey of about 500 customers in 2020, and nearly half of those NEM customers did show preference for an annual NEM true-up. So I think this is aligned with customer preference. It's aligned with what they could also get with PG&E. One thing I'll just note here that's on the proposal here is we're removing this NEM sweep calculation. There's a lot of details about that in your packet. The sweep calculation is something that we felt we had to do when we only had one choice. When we only had the option of offering monthly true-up, we added this additional set of complex calculations to make the monthly true-up look financially like an annual true-up, and now we're going to offer both. So that's my proposal. If we go to the next slide, just for context, this is just for our standard EBC NEM customers. So those customers that are on legacy municipal and Carafera, that's our low-income customers with NEM, they're already getting paid out at retail plus a penny, so this doesn't apply to them. We can go to the next slide. And Adrian, I think we move to the next one. After that, basically what we're showing here is that we're going to have two options, right? A monthly choice and an annual choice. With the annual choice, the main difference here for our customers is that today, if a customer would owe EBCE money, if they don't have enough credits or generation to cancel out their usage, they pay us on a monthly basis. Today, they would have that debt roll over month to month. So there may be that some customers that choose this annual option will then see come April and May that they have a larger bill from us. So that's a communications opportunity for us. It's also exactly what they experience with PG&E on the transmission and distribution side. And then, as I said earlier, we'll remove that sweep calculation because we don't need to make a monthly option look like an annual option, which is great because it's not. We can go to the next slide, Adrian, and we'll talk about communications. So enrollment, this is an annual process. So we're looking at customers being able to make this change annually. It would be effective sort of after the next cycle. Customers would also be defaulted to a monthly true-up. So I propose that starting in December of this year, we would start to send out letters and emails to all of the customers affected by this option. Customers would then have up until March 1 to make their selection. And then also those new NEM customers, folks that move in to a location that has rooftop solar, or customers that interconnect, they add rooftop solar, they would receive a welcome kit that explains these choices. So we can go on to the next slide. Just really quick financial implications. This is financial implications, but it's really not, because ultimately what happens is these customers would pay their bill. We would just see a slight influx in payments in that April-May timeframe. So there would be like a cycle of customers having debt that they would have to EBC, and then they would pay it off at the end of the cycle, and then it would start again. The dollars here, if you look at the eye chart here, you'll see the gold bar represents all of the customers today that are receiving that sort of sweep money that we think those are the customers that might be most interested in this. The total there in March is $200,000. It peaks out in December at just over $1 million. So this isn't a large amount of money that we're leaving, as debt with our customers. And if you go to the next slide, this is my cliffhanger slide actually, because I forgot to fill it in. So SMUD, our back office provider who would be implementing this work for us, we've already got most of this in our contract. They are estimating a fee of not to exceed $45,000 to complete the rest of our implementation. A lot of that includes a web form, because I really do think most of our NEM customers have email addresses on file. We think that a web form might be the best way to implement this, and that's where a lot of that money is coming from. So at this point, we can move on to comments and questions. Great, colleagues, are there any clarifying questions? Member Cal.
Thank you. So the rate that we have for our customers who sell us their excess electricity, we're not changing that.
No. So the question is, so the rate that customers sell us their excess electricity, so if they're over generating, that's always handled at retail credits today. It's the payout, the cash out, PG&E and EDC both handle that at sort of a wholesale sort of rate.
Okay. So. Yeah, all right,
So there's really no issues for the, financial implications for the customers. They just have a choice now.
Thank you.
Colleagues, anyone else with questions for Kelly? All right, we'll bring it to public comment. Please grant any speakers 1 minute to speak on this item.
Great. Blair Beekman, you're recognized for 1 minute.
Hi, Blair Beekman here. As I tried to offer on the IRP report, on the IRP report, you're having a real difficult time still to describe, dirty fossil fuel and nuclear use that's in our portfolio each month. And we really have to learn how to be clear about that. And that could very well explain our clean energy future very easily by offering those sort of accountable practices. And when we do that, can it help with this reporting into the future? Is that part of the process of how to clear these sort of issues up? Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. That concludes public comment.
Thank you. Bringing it back, colleagues, we have a resolution that updates our NEM policy. Is there any more discussion on this item?
Just have one question.
Sure.
This is clarifying this discussion.
Go ahead.
I have some experiences with people who are confused about the true up over the yearly true up. We found it very difficult to make that. I'm start for life. Maybe start for life.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yes, I have that.
Yeah.
There's a reason why we're bringing this.
I got it. But what I'm wondering is, given specifically given that experience, to which no one else knows what we're talking about.
Just a customer who didn't understand the policy.
You probably got that from context. But yes, that. Given that, I'm wondering about not just making it a choice, but making it an opt-in for the yearly. In other words, everybody would go to monthly because that is the thing that's clear.
Yes.
But those people, and you said that there's some percentage, and that those people who wanted desperately just to do it on a yearly basis, who actually clearly understand the policy, would have that option. I'm wondering if that might diminish the.
I think because I rushed through those, maybe I think I didn't get to make that there. So monthly is going to be the default.
Oh, that is. Oh,
yes,
okay.
It's going to be the default. And I do anticipate sharing, particularly for those customers where they would see an even like a significant financial impact to going annual. That would be messaged to those customers.
So already handled.
That covered.
So can I make the motion? If nobody else has a comment?
I don't see any other hands raised, so go ahead.
So I would like to move staff recommendation because boy, do I really want to.
Second.
Oh, let's take the second. I saw lips moving on Member Harrison.
Thank you.
So we've got a motion by Member Monroe and a second by Member Harrison. Please take the roll.
Great, thank you. Should be Alameda County. Albany.
Yes.
Berkeley.
Yes.
Dublin. Dublin. Fremont.
Yes.
Hayward.
Yes.
Livermore.
Yes.
Newark.
Aye.
Oakland.
Aye.
Piedmont.
Aye.
Pleasanton.
Aye. Aye.
Tracy.
Yes.
Union City.
Hi.
San Leandro.
Aye.
There we go.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Thank you. Do you want to try Dublin again?
Dublin.
Sorry, aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, thank you. All right, that will bring us to board member and staff announcements, including the request to place items on future board agendas. Does anyone have anything?
I just have one thing.
Member Monroe.
Yeah, so it just is, it's very fortuitous. What's going on in my house today is we're having a heat pump installed. So based on, based on a previous conversation, I thought it was just worth mentioning. Like literally today, I'm gonna go home, there's gonna be a heat pump. What?
It's cold in here tonight, so you can take it.
That's right.
Well, you can report back to us next meeting.
Absolutely.
We'll have you make that announcement at the end. We'll find out how the heat pump is going. All right, colleagues, if there are no further announcements, the time, Mr. Clerk, is 8:58 p.m. and this meeting is adjourned to Wednesday, November 16th. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Ask you a question about your pool.
Yes, I